Notre Dame fans, we are back. It is Monday. It is March 14th, and this is a big, big week, everybody. Number one, I'm back home, right? And I'm still a hot mess. Haven't even buttoned my shirt up as high as it needs to go. Got down here. It was about time to start the show. I hadn't unpacked my flag, which was packed up. I took Virginia. I didn't have my microphone with me. I was a hot mess. But you know what? Rule number 76, no excuses, pod like a champion. So I regrouped, and we are ready to rock and roll. We have a big show for you today, a big week for you, because on Thursday, Notre Dame starts spring ball. On Saturday, Saturday, there's some five-star big-time players coming, and we thought there was going to be a big-time player showing up on Thursday. That would be Cardinal Tate, five-star wide receiver. He's actually showing up tomorrow, and as Sean Davis found out for us, Ryan, you put the update about him being on campus, and then Sean obviously got a hold of Cardinal, and the reason he moved his visit up is because he's now staying for multiple days.
Yeah.
So he will be on campus for a few days. So it is big, big, big for Notre Dame. It's going to be a huge week. We're going to have a show on the recruiting visits later in the week because there's going to be some guys added. There's going to be some guys that can't show up. That's usually how it goes. So we'll have something here Thursday or Friday in regards to the weekend visit, but it's going to be a big one. We did have an article yesterday about it that we all kind of put together as a staff, and it's a big one, Ryan, and it kind of kicks off the recruiting visits, like spring visits. Notre Dame had like one junior day. They've been focusing on trying to get as many kids on campus for events, practices, blue gold game, things like that. That's really been the emphasis for Notre Dame, which makes a lot of sense. But man, you look at the list. We have a running list of who's visiting between now and the blue gold game at Irish Break on our message board at Irish Breakdown. It is an impressive group of dudes that are going to be on campus, Ryan.
Yeah, no, it really is. And it's nice to see about Cardinal because, I mean, my original thought is, what's the reason for moving the trip up? Is there another trip that's going to be right after? Is he going to hit multiple spots, maybe on like a Midwest trail type of situation? But obviously, staying extra days is a big opportunity, man, for Notre Dame. And it's a big tell that of his interest, right? Like he wants to dive deep and he wants to get to talk to these coaches and he wants to be on campus and he wants to take everything in, which I mean, it's huge. It's a huge kickoff and it's going to be busy few months to say the least, but it's going to be fun, man. It's going to be, going to be exciting to say the least, especially leading up to the blue gold game, like you said, next month.
So obviously Notre Dame, Cardinal Tate is part of what is a chase for an elite recruiting class, right? Sure. And Notre Dame currently has the number one class in the country, according to Rivals. They're number one on the 247 composite list. And they're sitting at 9 commitments, and they're off to a phenomenal start. And the difference now between what we have now and in the past is there's actually a board out there for them to continue adding some elite players. And that's really going to be the focus of today's show, Ryan. I got asked a question on Friday, because one thing I've said in the past is like, look, I just don't see how Notre Dame gets a number one class. And I'm not one of those, it's too hard to recruit at Notre Dame. I've made other reasons why. Like, it's just there tends to be a regional bias towards parts of the country that Notre Dame just doesn't get as many guys from. And, there's all types of reasons why certain kids get bumped up because they commit to school A, B, or C, and that inflates ratings. I pointed out how, when you look at Rivals last year, all 4 of the 5 stars that Alabama signed were way lower right before they committed to Alabama. And then the next ranking post coming to Alabama, they just skyrocketed up the rankings. There's all types of reasons that I just say it's not going to happen. And somebody asked me, do I still feel like they can't get number one class? I'm going to be honest. It's going to be tough, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But this is the first time I've actually felt that Notre Dame can get a number one ranked class, not just in the practical way, which we look at and say, after you break it down and the impact talent, the depth, balance, meeting needs, all those things, more of a practical number one class. Because you and I were talking about A&M's class. There's some dudes in that A&M class, but there's also some holes in that A&M class. They have, what was it? Half their class is in 3 positions, right? I mean, so there's a lot more that goes into it, but can you be number one from like a practical standpoint? Can you be number one from a recruiting ranking standpoint? I thought one was possible for Notre Dame. I didn't think the other was, but what we're going to discuss today is whether or not that is possible and what would it have to look like for Notre Dame to get to that level. And so it's sort of that chase for number one. And having a number one ranked class, practically speaking, Ryan, and that's where we're going to start off with, is what does Notre Dame need to do practically to get that kind of, that, whether it's number one or whatever, but that program changing 2023 class. Because I think when you go back and look at Bama, for example, when their reign started, they had a couple good classes, and then the 2008 class was really good, like elite class. I think it ended up ranked like number 3. It had like Julio Jones, Terrence Cody is a JUCO kid. It had some, Mark Ingram was in it, who wasn't a highly ranked recruit, but became a really good player. But it was the 2009 class coupled with it that really took Bama to the next level. And it played a role in, that those two classes played a role in their 2009 title run. But when they got real good, 11, 12, and beyond, those guys were the foundation for that, right? Those two classes kind of kicked off the run of just Bama finishing number one like every year, right? So 22 class for me was sort of that foundational class for Notre Dame, especially on defense. And then you look at Notre Dame pre-2022, they had a great 2021 offensive class. So those two classes kind of laid a really strong foundation that Notre Dame's going to use to build upon in 2022 and 2023 on the field. The 2023 class has that chance to be, Ryan, that class that takes them over the top, right? And it's that elite haul. And as they sit here at number 9, they've got a running back, a tight end. That's it on offense. They got 2 outstanding top 100 defensive linemen. They've got 2 linebackers, including a top 50 player in Drake Bowen. They've got a top 100 cornerback in Justin Rhett. The 2 linemen obviously are Keon Keeley, who's a 5-star, Brendan Vernon, who's a top 100 player ranked in the top 20 by Rivals. You've got Peyton Bowen at safety, who's a top 50 caliber kid. You've got a Don Schuler, who's a top 200 kid. Preston Zinter's a top 250 caliber kid, the other linebacker. It's a great start, but obviously if they don't add to it, it's going to be like the rest of Notre Dame's classes. It's going to be really good, but it's going to be 5 to 10 as opposed to 1 to 3. And we're talking practically speaking right now.
Yeah.
So, Ryan, as you look at it and you say, okay, how do they add to that? I think you and I agree there's one position that has to happen for it to kind of start the wave that's going to lead to Notre Dame having a number 1 ranked class. Again, we're talking right now first practically speaking, then we're going to dive into what it would take for them to be the number 1 ranked class and from a recruiting ranking services standpoint. So let's kick it off with practically speaking, as we look at it as former coaches, what does it have to happen? And it starts off, Ryan, at quarterback. That's the big one. They have to land an elite quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, it's the gatekeeper, right? The gatekeeper for what we think could be that class where they kind of put everything together. And I think that the cool thing about 2023, Brian, is that I think there's going to be some misnomers that are going to continue to get thrown away as far as how Notre Dame can recruit. Like you just said, for the first time, you think that it's possible that they could have a number 1 class. Right. I remember growing up, it was like, top 10 class would be awesome. Top 5 now. Wow, that's awesome, man. Yeah. That's cool. We're almost there. And now I think it's getting to the point now where there's excuses are kind of left at the door. Like there's just a changing of the understanding of how Notre Dame can recruit, which is awesome to see. Now, of course, for the quarterback, this is going to be a big one, right? If they are able to land, and I know we're going to talk a little more from a specific perspective later, but from a practical approach, landing a 5-star caliber quarterback in the vein of a Dante Moore is going to start an avalanche effect. It is going to start to snowball. It is. And we're going to see the wide receivers, in theory, if they're able to land Dante, wide receivers coming aboard. Harry Heastand now, of course, back in the fold, getting his recruiting chops back on the fold. Maybe we add another running back if you're Notre Dame. Maybe you add another tight end if you're Notre Dame. Who knows what the offensive class will end up looking like? But all I know is if you get the 5-star caliber quarterback that a Dante Moore is, that is the starting point for every class. Right. Because there's a lot of times, I mean, why do wide receivers wait so long historically to commit to schools? Because they want to see who the quarterback is, right? They want to see that guy. So that is the first point. That is the main point. And that is the gatekeeper for this class for Notre Dame. They have to nail the quarterback position in 2023.
And just practically, when we look around the country and we see the teams that are winning championships, it tends to be quarterback. I mean, it tends to be teams, usually, not always, but usually teams with outstanding quarterbacks. I mean, that's a vital piece to this puzzle nowadays. I mean, it's hard to have that championship team, and people will point to the anomalies like Georgia, but look, that's the exception, not the rule. And that's what you always have to look at. Like, don't give me that one anomaly of, well, Kyler Murray's 5'10, so you only need 5'10 quarterbacks from now on. He's the exception, not the rule, right? And same thing with other aspects. So whether this guy's runs a 4.7, Jerry Rice ran a 4.7. Jerry Rice is the exception, not the rule, right? And there's other exceptions, but you have to look at those type of things. And so, and this is one of those instances too, where Notre Dame is very fortunate that there is a 5-star quarterback that's also coming off a semester in which he had a 4.0 GPA right down the street, 2.5 hours away in Detroit, right? So I think those things all factor into it. But as you said, Dante's the ringleader. He's the Pied Piper, because the second aspect of this is you talked about it as receiver. Notre Dame has to start being more effective in recruiting the receiver position consistently. Notre Dame has landed some stud receivers in the last 15 years. And it goes all the way back to 2007 when they landed Duval Kamara and Golden Tate. A year later, they land Michael Floyd. And Duval Kamara was a 5-star player from, what state was he from? Right.
I don't remember.
He's from Jersey. See, you young bucks, man. He was from Jersey, right? And then sad. Golden Tate was from Tennessee. A year later, you get Michael Floyd, who was a 5-star recruit. You get Deion Walker, who was a top 100 recruit from Virginia. And then 2009, it kind of goes down a little bit. I think you got like Daniel Smith was trying to remember like who was part of that class. It was unimpressive, right? And so then you kind of go a couple years where it's like you don't really do great, and then you get like a class where you get Wolf Fuller and Corey Robinson and Torrey Hunter Jr. And then the next year it's like Corey Holmes, who I like, but then Justin Brent, who wasn't really a receiver. 2009 they got Shaq Evans and Robbie Toma. That's who they got in 2009. And in 2010 they got TJ Jones, who's a good player, but then they combine him with Daniel Smith and then Bennett Jackson, who ends up moving to defensive back. In 2011 they get DeVaris Daniels, but they don't have another receiver in the class. There's just DeVaris Daniels. They missed out on Evan Spencer and some other guys in that class. 2012, they do a nice job. They get Chris Brown, Devontae Neal, and Justin Ferguson. Justin Ferguson wasn't a Notre Dame caliber player. Devontae Neal was a weird situation. 2013, they come out and have a great class. And then 2014, it's down again. And then 2015 starts a run of a couple of years where I thought they did pretty, a couple of years they did pretty well. In 2015, they get Equanimity St. Brown. They got Miles Boykin. That was an outstanding CJ Sanders, Jalen Guyton, who would have been a really good player for Notre Dame if he doesn't get hurt. 2016, they get Chase Claypool, Javon McKinley, Kevin Stepherson. Then the 2017 season comes, and you end up getting Michael Young, who was an okay player, Jafar Armstrong. I liked Michael Young, and okay player is kind of what he was in Notre Dame. I actually liked him coming out of high school. Jafar Armstrong was the other. 2018, you have a really good receiver class. Then 2019, you don't have any receivers left on your roster from that. Your 2020 class falls apart because your coach. So they've been able to recruit receivers, but it's been really up and down. And they've like one year it's all big guys, the next year there's no consistency to it, right? Chancey Stuckey's task is to be a great team. You've got to do this every year. Not, this was a great receiver class and then nothing the next year. Oh, that's a great receiver class, then nothing the next year. And so it comes down to recruiting elite classes and then developing them. And that's what Chancey Stuckey's being tasked with. But when you sign a quarterback like Dante Moore, and you're coming off of a year in which you signed one receiver, and then the class before that has nobody left on the roster at receiver, it's imperative that you not only meet your numbers needs, but you hit it with flat-out dudes. You can't afford to take a 3-year project in this class. They need 4, and they got to be dudes. And that's not an easy task, but it's made easier when you land a guy like Dante Moore, and that's why it's so important that Notre Dame finish that one off. And then after that, it starts to fall in place. We feel good about where things are at the offensive line. There's at least 2 top 100 linemen that we feel good about Notre Dame getting right now, right? Monroe Freeling and Charles Jagasol.
Yep.
And then after that, it's just finishing off the defensive class. It's already off to a great start, right? It's about finishing off that defensive class. And so you've got to finish it the way it starts, right? And that right there has been the issue for Notre Dame. we've seen Notre Dame have a number one ranked class early on before. Last year's class was ranked number one at one point in time, I believe. The year before's class, Blake Fisher was ranked number one at one point in time, but they never finished as strong as they started.
Sure.
And that's the key, Ryan. But it can't just be this position. It's got to be, they got to keep adding dudes everywhere. And that's a key to this whole thing, Ryan.
And I think that one thing that we've seen, Brian, and you could correct me if I am wrong on this sense, right? But it seems that there's been a much more group approach to recruiting this cycle than in most years. I think of Braylon James, who we just put out something this morning at Irish Breakdown, where it's not just, him talking to Chancey Stuckey. Tommy Reese flew out to watch a basketball game and talked shop with them. Marcus Freeman touches base with them 2 times a week. Like, this is a group
Chad
effort.
Bowden talks to all
Chad Bowden, obviously. Yes, yeah. So he's obviously, every recruit that we're talking about, we're just going to assume Chad is at the forefront of that recruit. We don't even need to say Chad at this point. Like, all these guys, man. So, that's 4 main recruiters, right? Like, who cares about main and primary recruiters anymore? They have everybody's a main recruiter in this thing now, which I think is a different approach than maybe we've seen in the past. And that gives me some hope. And obviously, we need to see it come to fruition. We need to see what the on-field looks like, the continued momentum in that spectrum as well. But I have hope that it is going to finish the way that it has started, because it seems that there's just a changing ideology. I keep saying there's a changing ideology. When we have an effort like this from Notre Dame, where it's not just one main recruiter and a secondary, like, they are just throwing everybody out there. These are the guys we want. We have found who we want. We have identified them. Now we're throwing out all these guys at you. There's not going to be a day where you don't hear from Notre Dame. Like, that's just what it kind of seems like on the path right now. And I think I think that should give everybody some hope that, and you talked about it, right? Big time quarterback. They need a dynamic wide receiver group, and they need numbers in the wide receivers. So that is a paramount position. The offensive line. We've seen offensive line have good recruiting under Coach Quinn, but we need it to continue, right? You need to take a step up from the development aspect of everything. And then, defensive back, Coach Mickens and everybody. It needs to continue, obviously, but I think that I think there's positivity in that room where you expect that, like, hey, this might be different right now. It could be different.
Right. We can't sit there and be like, well, Jeff Quinn did a horrible job recruiting, because we're talking about how talented the offensive line class is coming back. So if there were some breaks he caught, like a guy like Blake Fisher being from your own state. But he did some good things to get guys there, and obviously Harry Heastan played a role. Harry Heastan was the guy that initially recruited guys, two of the guys we expect to be starters this year, and Andrew Kristofic and Josh Lugg. So, as you mentioned, it's the development piece, but. I think the interesting thing too is how is the new look? There's a lot of buzz and excitement about the offensive staff and what they're doing as far as who they're going to be able to add. Whereas with the defensive staff, I don't think there's quite as much buzz about that, because I think a lot of the buzz is, okay, they got to hang on to who they have first. And, Keon and Peyton Bowen obviously being those guys, I'm still confident they're going to hang on to Keon Keeley. I'm not confident at all right now they're going to hang on to Peyton Bowen. Brian Smith had an update on our board last night. It's another reason you need to be a member of the message board. And he talked about, right now he views it as, Notre Dame is kind of Peyton Bowen's leader as opposed to the school he's committed to. I discussed with him today when Brian called me a little bit ago. I was like, I don't even know if that's it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't even know if like, he acts more like Oklahoma's his leader. You know what I mean? Like, as far as Notre Dame. And so, but that's kind of the thing. And so we're not focused as much on the fact that there still needs to be some adding to that class too. They can't just finish with who they have. They need at least 2 more defensive linemen. They need at least 2 more, they need at least 1 more DB if they can hold on to what they have, and they need 1 more linebacker. So there's some adding that needs to go on, but the big key on defense more than anything is just keep what you have, because there's not another Keon Key out there that you can get if you lose him. There's not another safety on the board that's like Peyton Bowen that I think they have a shot at. Now, maybe they can come from behind and get Caleb Downs. We'll see. He's working on setting up another visit. If he makes that visit, then, hey, they got a puncher's chance. But it's really interesting, because a number one class from a practical standpoint, and what we mean is practical is this a class that gives you an opportunity to go out there and play and beat anybody. It has to have balance. And offensively, there's a lot of you need to add to it. And I think that's partly why there's so much more buzz, is because right now the offensive class doesn't really have anybody, right? There's a running back and a tight end. I'm not concerned about that. As we've said, it's super early. There are some teams only have 2 to 4 guys committed, period, much less 2 on one side of the ball.
Right.
But at some point in time, you got to start adding them. And I think that a lot of kids around the country, to me, Ryan, and you tell me if you disagree, a lot of kids to me seem like they're kind of waiting on that quarterback shoe to drop for Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Like they Notre Dame, but they want to know that if I'm going to go there, I want to go there with a dude. And that's kind of how I read the situation.
Yeah, no, I read it very similarly, because obviously we've talked to a few kids where we feel good about Notre Dame's chances, but we have also maintained that it's only going to increase with a Dante Moore. So I think that's, especially for wide receivers and offensive linemen in particular, right? Running back skill, like the offense in general, you're going to want to wait to see who your quarterback is, right? Like, it doesn't a good wide receiver, it doesn't matter if you don't have a trigger man, like, just at the end of the day, right? So, and it makes total sense because, we talked about it a lot. What's been the position that's held Notre Dame back at times, right? It's been quarterback. And if you want to keep preaching that things are changing, that has to change too. Like, you need to bring some dudes in and you need to develop them. So I think Notre Dame is, obviously, we're going to talk about somebody that they're in a really good spot with. If they're able to land him, then I think that the class, again, I think it starts to snowball from there. And then we really start then to see them put together a good class. But it starts and ends at the quarterback position, because you have to prove, because I think that they're already proven that there's some misconceptions about Notre Dame recruiting that they're changing a little bit already. But I also think that they need to change that perception that Notre Dame can't recruit the quarterback position at a high level and can't develop that position. I think that needs to change. And I think it can change, which is exciting.
So quarterback, big time quarterback, 4 receivers, at least 3 of them have to be dudes.
Dudes. Yep.
They need, to me, they can get away with only 3 offensive linemen. I think 4 is more of the target number. I think they can get to 5 in the right scenario, but I don't know if that would take some unique, like they've already got 4 and Samson Okunlola or Monroe Freeling wants to come, right? I think that's how that one would have to go. Need at least 2 more defensive linemen. I would argue that they need 5, and we can get into that in another show. I think that'd be an interesting topic to discuss. At least 1 more linebacker, although I could see them taking 2, but 1 is the need. And then if you keep everybody, 1 more DB, and it's got to be a corner. Ideally a corner. So that's where Notre Dame is at. That's what the needs are. And the higher level of player that they land at those positions, the better chance they have. And of course you could look at, like, there's get some football players, right? Like, I don't know what position Ronan Hannafin's going to play. And I don't know if when you land him, if I would necessarily check a box for a position group for him. I just say, look, this dude can flat out play, and we're going to figure out where he's going to play when the rest of the class takes shape. Right. And Samuel Mpemba kind of look at that. Like, that's why if Samuel Mpemba were to commit to Notre Dame, I wouldn't necessarily stop recruiting Darren Gillette and Jaden Osbury and Tamir Robinson, because he can do so many things. Like, if you have a need for another tight end, move him over there, right? My
favorite Brian Driscoll saying, I'm sorry to cut you off. My favorite Brian Driscoll saying, what position does Samuel Mpemba play? Wherever you want him to play.
Wherever he wants. Right, wherever you want him to play. If there's a need for another defensive lineman, the kid's 6'4", 230. He may be playing opposite Keon Keeley someday. You know what I mean? So
could be.
So you don't stop recruiting those other dudes. And what I have been told too, Ryan, and you and I have discussed this. I've said this on the show before. Yep. There's some at Notre Dame that think this class is going to have room for a lot of guys, because there's a thought that there's going to be some movement out of the program as Notre Dame kind of challenges some guys, right? Meaning this is a new era, this era of just kind of just work on getting your degree and just, you don't have to really try hard and all, in the football field. And all. There's some things where it's like, yeah, if you don't want to work like a champion, then you can go somewhere else and do that, right? They're not going to force guys out, but it's just the new direction of the program. It's going to be harder for some guys to just go through the motions. And so you're going to load up and just they want to remake the roster is what this staff wants to do. They want to remake the roster, not just from a talent standpoint, but from an attitude standpoint. That was the most important thing for Marcus Freeman when hiring coaches. Hey, Chancey Stuckey, I don't care if you've got 1 year of coaching experience under your belt. I'm expecting you to go against Brian Hartline. I'm expecting you to go against Holman Wiggins. I'm expecting you to go against whoever the freaking heck is coaching receivers at Clemson and Oklahoma and USC. I'm expecting you to go into the rooms of these kids and get them and beat those schools. That's the expectation. Coach McCullough, I hired you because you're a great coach, but the expectation also is you're going to go out there and get stud running backs every year. Coach, and Marcus is Coach Freeman has said this publicly, and Coach Heastan has said it publicly. Like that was a conversation you had with Coach Heastan. Like, hey, because he heard the rumors, he heard the reports and stuff about Heastan. Coach Heastan was like, yeah, of course I want to recruit. I want to coach great players. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and he said, like, okay, I don't like being on a jet or plane all the time, but I love getting to know these kids. I love doing all that kind of stuff, right? And he understands it's part of the deal. Al Washington, hey, you know what? You just signed one of the best linebacker classes in the country. Now your challenge is to sign the best defensive line in the country at Notre Dame, right? And it's the same thing. I mean, he brought Jared Parker here partly because he believes he's going to be a great recruiter at a place like Notre Dame. They've coached together before. He's seen what he can do. He's seen what he can do selling Purdue. And imagine what he's going to do selling Notre Dame. That's the thought process. And if you're not willing to go toe to toe with Bama and Ohio State and Georgia and Clemson, then go coach somewhere else. I mean, that's exactly what's the message that's been delivered by Marcus Freeman. And now it's okay. Now you got to go land him, right? It's great to have that philosophy, but if the head coach at Rutgers was like, "This is what we're going to do. We're going to beat it," that sounds great and all, coach, but ain't happening. At Notre Dame, you can do that. You should be able to do that. And that was the article that I wrote on Friday was about, Ryan, was the one thing I love about Marcus Freeman and this staff is that they are destroying the narrative of, oh, you have to shop down a different aisle. And, there's X amount of kids that don't want to come to Notre Dame. There's this whole thing of, well, 40% of Notre Dame can only get 40% of the top 100 players. That's 40 players. You only need 25. You know what I mean? So, like, you couldn't sign every kid in the top 100 that wants to come because who has the grades. I mean, think about that. But the way it was perceived was, oh, only 40%. Oh, that's why they can't win. Well, 40% of the top 100 players is still way more than you can actually – I mean, legally, you're only allowed to sign 25, right? You can go a little past that because of the way that they handle early enrollees. But Notre Dame's never going to go past 30. That means there's 10 leftovers, right? Mm-hmm. Go get those guys. If it's only 40%, then go get that 40%, right? And so I think that's kind of been the challenge of this whole excuse making for, oh, it's hard, it's this. Yeah, it's hard. So work hard. You know what I mean? Go do the job. And it's also the other positive, the other change, and this is where the former head coach gets a little bit of credit, because he hired people that helped them get to that point, is what people have to understand too is kids that are in the 2023 class were in middle school the last time Notre Dame wasn't really good. I mean, think about that. Like in their lifetime, in their formative years, Notre Dame has been a minimum 10-3 team every year.
True.
Minimum.
Yeah.
And they've been in 2 playoffs, right? That's what these kids have grown up on. They didn't grow up on Charlie Weiss and Bob Davie and Ty Willingham, like kids that were being recruited when Brian Kelly first got here. It's a different era. Notre Dame's a different animal now. And if you put in the work, as Marcus Freeman staff are showing, you can get those kids. If you're unwilling to do the work, then it's easier to make excuses for why you can't get those players. It's hard. We got to shop down a different aisle. And on the way to going shopping, I'm going to swing by the golf course real quick. Just letting you know. I'm going to go to this speaking engagement where everybody can tell me how much they love me as opposed to going down there and grinding on the recruiting trail. Right? So it's easier to just say, well, it's just too hard. We got to shop down a different aisle. Marcus Freeman's not making those excuses, and he's not allowing his staff to make those excuses. And that's why, Ryan, I think for the first time in a long time, I feel like, hey, you know what? I actually think they do have a chance. And I've been someone who's always been like, those excuses are BS. And even I am surprised by how well they're recruiting right now. I think also part of it, too, that we have to acknowledge is I don't know if it's possible every year to do this because it is a unique year in that there's a lot more really highly ranked Northern kids. And we addressed this last week.
That's true.
You're not going to get a Cardinal Tate from Chicago and a Dante Moore from Detroit every year.
Mm-hmm.
Rodney Gallagher's don't come along every single year in Pittsburgh. Braylon James type. Right. There's multiple highly ranked kids in Massachusetts, right? You don't often find a kid, although it's happened more than you think, you don't often find a kid like Braylon James who's so academically oriented that Notre Dame's going to be his leader before he ever visits. It's not, but my point is That will happen more often than the 5-star from Chicago or Illinois, because Marvin Mims, the kid who's a stud at Oklahoma, was previously committed to Stanford. Notre Dame was never in the game for him. You can guarantee that Chancey Stuckey was coaching and there was the next Marvin Mims, Notre Dame would be in the game for him. And so, there's a 5-star offensive lineman from Illinois, right? There's just there's a 5-star offensive lineman, to your point, from Massachusetts. There's a stud athlete linebacker from Massachusetts. There's another 4-star top 250 linebacker from Massachusetts. It's just one of those unique years where there's just a few more Northern kids that they can get. Unless that continues, you're probably saying, okay, to get to that number one from a recruiting ranking standpoint might be a little bit tougher. But let's talk about that, Ryan.
Yep.
For Notre Dame to get the number one ranked recruiting class in the country, there has to be sort of, I mean, there's certain, how do we say this? There's certain
criteria.
Yeah, like there's certain ranges, right? Let's put it that way. There's certain ranges you have to get to. And we kind of, we were talking before the show, and we kind of put this together to show, like, this right here is sort of a look at, so since the playoff era, this is the 247 composite rankings. This is sort of the range of you have to get to. I think I look at that 2016 Bama class as sort of the anomaly, right? That's the low end, that 302. That's kind of okay, you're not going to be able to be that low and consistently be a number one ranked class. I think the A&M 330 is a little bit of an anomaly on the high side. I think when you kind of look down to it, it's that 313 to 325 is sort of the range that you have to be at, right? And there's a number of 5-stars. You've got to get minimum 3-star, 5-star recruits from this. Again, we're talking recruiting ranking standpoint. You've got to get minimum 14 to 15 4-star kids in addition to the 5-stars. You need at least, I would say, 6 top 50 players. Again, we're looking at that 2016 Bama class as the anomaly, right? And so you need at least 6 top 100, top 50 recruits. You need at least, in my opinion, 11 to 12 top 50 recruits. You need at least somewhere between 17 to 21 total top 250 recruits. That's where you need to be to get to a number one ranked class. That's a lot of, I mean, you're talking about, I'm going to pull that up again. Minimum 3 to 4 5-stars. Notre Dame doesn't have 3 to 4 5-stars on the 24/7 composite rankings on the roster right now at this point. Now, again, that doesn't bother me because there's some guys that are Isaiah Foskey's, I'm sorry, he's a 5-star, whether he was ranked as one or not. You know what I mean? But, and we've had this conversation, but to get to a ranking standpoint. So that's where you need to be. The question I want to ask you first, Ryan, and that I want us to discuss first is, people say, like somebody says, Nicholas Grosh earlier said, like, look, if you get all the players you want and it's from an impact standpoint, blah, 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 it doesn't matter where you're ranked. Well, I've said for years that it doesn't, practically speaking. But I do think it matters from a perception standpoint, Ryan. And when you go on the recruiting trail next year and you just signed the number 1 or number 2 class, whether that practically means a darn thing when you go out on the football field that year, it does carry weight when you go and go into the living rooms. Hey, we're number 2 right now. This is right before the December signing day. We're number 2 right now. We get you, we're going to be number 1. Or, hey, we just signed the number 1 class. Look what we're building. We're building a championship team. You got to come be a part of it when you're talking to 2024 kids. So I think from a perception standpoint, Ryan, it does carry weight to have a class that you can point to and say, look at what we were ranked by such and such. This is evidence that we've caught Bama, we've caught Georgia. Now, you and I know, and everybody here knows, you haven't caught those teams till you beat them on the field, right? But what was the first step for Georgia to beat Bama? It was to go start beating Bama on the recruiting trail. That eventually led to them to have the horses to beat Bama on the field, right? And so I do think that there is merit there is impact to having a number 1 ranked class when you talk about from a perception standpoint, and perception in recruiting is very important.
Yeah, no, and I think like you kind of already talked about, right? Like when we're moving to the next class, right? 2024, let's just say for a second. So we're talking about sophomores about to enter their junior year. And if Notre Dame did end, let's just say hypothetically speaking for a second, let's say they ended with a number 1 class or top 3 class, for instance. Let's just stay there for a second. It is so easy to sell that, hey, the trajectory of this program is heading in such a different direction. Because right now, Texas A&M is using that on the trail. And we talked about the practicality of Texas A&M's class, right? 7 defensive linemen in that class. I would be shocked if all 7 of them ended up being on that team in 2 years. Like, I mean, straight up, right? Because there's just not enough reps to go around. There's not enough positions to go around for that type of class.
Plus, I'll say it since I know you don't want to say it.
Sure.
Kids who go to a school because of a payout are also smart enough to know that if I enter the transfer portal in a year and I'm still considered this guy, there's going to be another payout waiting, right? I may stay where I'm at, but now I've created another bidding war. These one-time payments aren't going to end with these kids. Look, I've been pretty right about how this all is going to go, right? How the transport is going to be, how the NIL is going to go. I'm telling you, the schools like A&M that basically go buy mercenary type recruits, those kids aren't committed to you for 3 years. You're going to have to buy them off every year. It's like from Pony XS, like you got a payroll to meet now, you know what I mean? And they're not going to just stop taking that money because you gave it to them that one time. So I know you don't want to say it. I'll say it. But anyway, please continue with your point.
No, you're fine. So, I mean, perception is, right, the next class, the 2023 class for Texas A&M that they're recruiting, they'll say, we just signed the best class in the country. We are about to be Bama. We're about to beat those guys. We are moving in the right direction. But practicality says, maybe it's not the number 1 class when you just kind of say, but does it fit together, right? Does it mesh? Is this a class that is sustainable, right? Like, I don't know if it's sustainable. Notre Dame, though, if they do it the right way, you're looking forward, and these guys, whether it's right or wrong, they're going to look at the class and say, oh, wow, they did that on the trail. Because, I mean, like we talked about, wide receivers know who Dante Moore is, right? But does every future prospect, do they know who Preston Zinter is? Do they know this guy? Have they seen those guys play? So that the perception is the numbers that Brian just highlighted, right? That 330 Texas A&M just put up. Or again, is it sustainable? That's a completely different conversation, and I would say that it isn't. But either way, the next wave of Texas A&M recruits are going to look at that number and say, wow, they signed Shamar Stewart and Walter Nolan and all these dudes, and they had the top-ranked class and the highest-graded class in a few years. They're going to look at that, and they don't care as much about the names as they do about the data that people put in front of them. Right. So Notre Dame being able to land that type of class is going to have resonance for years to come. Right. The next class, the class after that, they all want to play with Dante Moore, but more than anything, right, they're going to want to play with a great, great team. And that is what Notre Dame has potential to highlight here in this class. Right.
So what's it going to take to get to number 1? We kind of showed the point system. So what Ryan and I did is we got on the phone beforehand and we kind of went through what we thought would be a realistic great class for Notre Dame, which means realistic means you're not hitting all your guys, right? So you don't get all 4 of your top 4 receivers. You don't get your top 4 offensive linemen. You don't get your top 4 defensive linemen per se, right? You don't go, oh, you're going to flip a 5-star corner. You're not getting Caleb Downs, right? Like, we're trying to be realistic here of guys that we think Notre Dame either leads for or is in the top 3 for. Would you say it's fair to say that every kid we picked is Notre Dame is either the leader or in the top 3?
Yes.
Okay. Every kid that's on this list.
Yep.
And it looks like this. So this would be the class that we the hypothetical class that we talked about. Dante Moore, quarterback. Cedric Irvin and Jeremiah Lovett, running back. Carnell Tate, Braylon James, Rodney Gallagher, and Malik Elzy at receiver. We thought about putting Jaden Greathouse but again, we don't want to have it to where they hit the inside straight and get all 4 of those guys, right? We're trying to be realistic. How often does that happen? But we'll talk about Jaden Greathouse in a little bit. But Cooper Flanagan at tight end. Again, realistically, we're not going to put Deuce Robinson in there because right now they're not in his top 3. I don't even know how hard they're recruiting him at this point in time. We do know that they've reached out. They're still involved, but how much? I don't know. Offensive line went Monroe Freeling, Charles Jagasol, Austin Saraveld, and Elijah Page. good offensive line class, not like this generational offensive line class. We don't have Samson Okunlola on there because right now, although we think he might be in the top 3, he's so kind of not engaged in recruiting. It's hard to really know where exactly they stand. They got to get him on campus and all this kind of stuff. So we're being realistic. We don't have him in there. Defensive line wise, we have Keon Keeley, Brendan Vernon, Jason Moore, and Boubacar Traore. I hope I said that correctly. At linebacker, we've got Drake Bowen, Preston Zinter, and Samuel Mpemba. At corner, we've got Justin Rhett and Christian Gray. At safety, we have the kids already committed, and then we have Ronan Hannafin at athlete. So, like, we didn't add Darren Gillette, who we think Notre Dame might be in the top 3 to 4. You're going to have an update on the board here in a little bit about Darren Gillette. We didn't add Tamir Robinson, who I would argue Notre Dame's in the top 2-4. But again, we're trying to be realistic that they don't meet all their numbers and needs. You're always going to fall short somewhere. Offensive line class could easily be better than the one we just presented, but we're trying to give like a somewhat realistic class. So we added that class up, and then we went over to the 247 Sports class calculator, which is actually a really cool feature. You can actually add kids to the class and then see what the points would be. And what we came up with is that class. And I think everybody listening right now would say that's a realistic class. That's like, based on where things stand right now, that's a realistic class. That class would be 315.97. Well, when you pull up what we showed earlier, 315.97 would have been ranked number 1 in 2020. It would have been ranked number 1 in 2016, and it would have been ranked number 1 in 2015. So 2 Bama classes and then the Georgia class, which served as a foundation for this year's title team. It'd be higher than that. And it's below some of the others. But that right there, Ryan, to your point, is just that realistic class gets Notre Dame in the top 3, in my opinion. Yep. And gives them a class that in other years would have been a number 1 ranked caliber class.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
I just, again, realistic, right? And I don't even think that's, we're not stretching things there, right? Because there's other guys that Notre Dame feels good about, and we feel pretty good about, that Brian mentioned already, where it's not unreasonable to think that Tamir Robinson or Darian Gillette could be in the class, someone in that conversation. Samson and Kolola, potentially, right? And obviously that one's it's going to be a battle for sure. But the point is that I think that there's a baseline for this class where they can be in that conversation. Will they finish as number 1 class? Recency bias would say maybe not, but they would be very close. It would be a conversation. They would be in the top 2 or 3. They would be like they would be head to head with whoever the assumed leader was, whether that is Texas A&M or Alabama or Georgia, whoever the top of the class ends up being, right? Like Notre Dame will be in that ballpark. And just the fact that they are there, that they can compete, it's a great baseline, man. Because again, if they pull off just a couple surprises on the trail, just a couple, and they close out on every player that we think that they are in the lead for and that they should close out for, this is the chance to be in like you talked about, right? The 2021 class was kind of a table setting class for the defense. 2022, the other way around. 2021 was kind of a table setting class for offense. 2022 was kind of a table setting class for defense. Now, if Notre Dame's able to put that in a back-to-back-to-back type of cycle here and pulls off their best, honestly, Brian, we talked about this before we started, their best class since.
Well, you asked me that, and I said, look, that would be the best class they've signed, just from a recruiting standpoint, not rankings, but recruiting standpoint, since I really started paying attention to recruiting as an adult, which is kind of like 2000, right? And I was in college at the time. I was 12 when the 1990 class signed. I can only look back at it retroactively. I don't know what it was like coming out. Lou Emoji said that's the best class he's ever seen, but I can't compare it to that because, again, I was 12, so I couldn't tell you what my emotions were, what my evaluations were. We know what that class became, right? And we're not saying this class is going to be that, because recruiting and development are 2 completely different things. But it's clearly, hands down, the best class they've signed since I've been an adult, and I'm 43. It's a long time. And it's a balanced class. It's got elite players, all those type of things. So when you look at that class, so let's pull up this again, Ryan, and show people that, right? So how would it stack up? Okay, that class, looking at the 247 sports rankings, it would have 4 5-stars. So
Mhm.
again, it's on the bottom part of that. It would have 17 total 4-stars, which is in a good place there. I mean, it's near the top of that
Yep.
group. It would have 6 top 50 players, which is on the bottom part of the need there, which we said is like minimum 6. It has 12 total top 100 players, which is kind of in the bottom, the bottom of those ranges. It has 17 top 250 players, which would be on the bottom of those ranges. So again, it's closer to the bottom of those ranges, but it's in those ranges, right? That doesn't include, like we mentioned, some guys may be moving up the ranking, some guys moving down. We can't control that right now. We can just kind of go off what they're ranked right now. But that is kind of big in regards to just looking at where Notre Dame stands with everything. So when we kind of look at that class, Ryan, you say, okay, well, what can they do to make the class even better? And say, so we started kind of doing some thoughts. So let's look at some guys we think that Notre Dame actually has a legitimate shot at and what that would do to the ranking. So as we said, 315.97. So we said, what if they landed Samson Okunlola instead of Austin Saraveld, for example? That would jump Notre Dame up to 319.24.
Mm-hmm.
What if they got Jaden Greathouse instead of Malik Elzy? That would jump them up to 320.13, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, again, let's pull that up. 320 puts them really close to a lot of those other classes, like very close to a lot of those other classes. And at this point in time, Ryan, I think when we look at it, it's one of those things where when you look at this class, you say, okay, it's not quite there yet, but it's close. And now you're in a situation where we just added Okunlola, who I think we would both argue and agree Notre Dame is probably in the top 3 right now for. Jaden Greathouse, I would argue they're in the top, definitely in the top 3, 4. The kid's already got 2 visits scheduled to Notre Dame. And if we have actually a master visit list at Irish Breakdown on our message board, we have Jaden Greathouse coming. He's going to be coming in the spring. But the other thing is he's already talked about he's going to come back for I believe it was Ryan Story had this. He's going to come back in the summer for a camp. He's going to camp at Notre Dame. And it's not camp from the standpoint of he needs to earn an offer. Trust me, Notre Dame already loves Jaden Greathouse. If he wanted to commit tomorrow, they would take it. But it's more of just about him wanting to work with Chancey Stuckey, just kind of get some of that firsthand experience working with Coach Stuckey. And I think that's a big, big thing. So when you look at it, you add those 2 guys and you say, okay, that gets you to 320. So kind of what gets you to that next level? And I'm going to bring that back up. What gets you to that next level, right? That 323. Like if you get to 323, you're right there. You're right there as a, not just like number 1-ish, but number 1. And to get that, it would require them to get like a guy that's not on the board. So as opposed to replacing a guy, it would be more about landing someone that right now we don't expect to land. So let's just say hypothetically, they're able to land Deuce, right? Like replacing guys with other higher ranked guys only gets you so far. It's you got to go get someone that right now they're not expected to get. So a Deuce Robinson, like Ryan, I think the example you used when we were talking before was like, a corner that we don't expect them to get right now. That's like a top 100 guy.
A third corner, like a Micah Tease or someone like that ballpark.
Or getting Jaden Greathouse on top of those other 4 receivers, or getting Samson Okunlola on top of those other guys, as opposed to replacing somebody.
Sure.
Adding a 5th defensive lineman would be that if it was like a top 100 guy. Like adding Devin Houston as the 5th D lineman, which I would be all about, doesn't move the needle. It's like a half a point, right? And so from a ranking standpoint, it doesn't really move the needle. Going out and adding another Jason Moore caliber player, a Boubacar caliber player, that would do it. But again, I don't know if that guy's realistically on the board right now. Because again, what we don't want to do in all these discussions, and I think you all know us well enough to know, you know me well enough to know, and part of the reason Ryan and I get along so well is because he sees it the same way, is we don't want to blow smoke up your keisters and make you think that this is going to happen, but we know it's not. That's why we never hardly ever talked about Nico as a quarterback option for Notre Dame. We never talked about it. Everybody kept asking us about the Toviano kid from Texas visiting. right? Well, we're hearing he's going to visit. We hardly ever talked about it. Well, what did we have in Brian's intel piece last night? He hardly ever talks to Notre Dame. He's not coming to Notre Dame. Right now, we could have got some clickbaity stories out of that and talked about it and all that, but we're not going to do that. So when we're talking about this class, we actually think that's a doable class. This isn't like in the past, I'd put like a dream class together, and that's exactly what it was. It was a dream. It's not going to happen, right? Like I had dreams when I was a teenager about meeting Christy Brinkley. It was never going to happen, right? And I'm dating myself a little bit, but you know, if you were my age and you grew up watching National Lampoon's Vacation, you would have understood why I felt that way. But you get the point that I'm making, right, Ryan? Like it's a dream class is like, hey, if they do this, they're going to finish number one. Well, everybody can say that. You know, Michigan can say that. Michigan State can say it. If we land all these guys, we'll be number one. We're trying to give you what we feel is a realistic class. And this is the first time that I've ever really felt this deep into the recruiting process that Notre Dame actually had that opportunity. Now, there's people in the chat right now talking about how Carnell Tate's talking about big news coming tomorrow. Our anticipation of that big news is what was reported on our message board 10 days ago, I think at least, which is he plans on releasing a top 3 coming up very soon. And he's releasing it the day he's supposed to arrive at Notre Dame. I think I can safely say without stealing the kid's thunder that Notre Dame will be in that list. Ohio State will be in that list. But again, this is another reason, folks, why you need to be on the message board, because Sean had this update like March 3rd, 4th, something like that. So it's kind of funny yesterday when I saw it being, Ryan showed me, we saw that it was being reported that by people that Carnell Tate was visiting on the 17th, and people on our message board were like, yeah, we've known that for like 2 weeks, you know, because Sean had that on the board. So just another reason we encourage you to be a part of the message board is that's just stuff that you're only going to be able to find at the Irish Breakdown Premium message board, which you can find a link to below, or you can find it. See that scrolling thing? That's where you can find it. So Ryan, that's a realistic class. Would you agree? Yeah. And I think that gets them in that wheelhouse. Now, beyond that, it's like so close. So as we see, though, that's a realistic class. That's not going to be an easy class to get. That's not going to be easy at all.
Yeah. I mean, so, it's definitely realistic, but there is some optimism, obviously, right? We included guys that maybe necessarily aren't number 1 Notre Dame right now, but are top 2 to 3, right? Like they're in the ballpark, so they should be able to at least, you know, continue that push. So it's not 100% conclusion that all the players that we listed are going to be coming to Notre Dame. It's just Notre Dame at this point has put themselves in very good position. And if they're in good position and we think that they can be the closers that we believe they can be, they'll have an opportunity to end up at Notre Dame.
And that's the great unknown about, if we're being honest, that's the great unknown about where the staff is. Like what we're hearing about Chancey Stuckey on the recruiting trail is phenomenal. I mean, it's impressive, but he has 0 commits as of right now.
Right.
Okay, how is he going to close? Can Jared Parker go out there and get involved with a tight end that's not on the board right now that's highly ranked and get him? We don't know. Coach He stands back. He's done some great things. Is he a guy that we're going to look at and say, okay, he's going to get he's going to get his top 5 guys, right? We're trying to be realistic here. They're going to get Darren Gillette, Jaden Osbury, and Samuel Pemba and Tamir Robbins. Like we're trying to be realistic here, right? It's going to take a lot of work. We don't know if Al Golden's going to be able to close on those guys. We don't know if Mike Mickens can go out there and get another stud corner. He's got to, you know, this is a big year for Mike Mickens on the field and on the recruiting trail. Can Chris O'Leary hang on to Peyton Bowen? That's a big question mark, right? So there's still a lot of unknowns about this staff, but the exciting thing is as of right now, they've put themselves in great position because that class that we just talked about, Ryan, that's not a bat 1,000 class. That ain't happening. You're not batting 1,000. It's just not going to happen. Nobody does. A&M at defensive line did, but not everywhere else. Nobody bats 1,000 everywhere. It's a class that we think could be special. And then we want more Salty Driscoll. You got some of that on Friday, that's for sure. I don't know if you listened to the beginning of my attack on the University of Texas. We did not get demonetized, by the way, which I was very surprised by. I was very encouraged by. But it says if Notre Dame does get to a 320 or greater, doesn't that limit the availability of highly ranked players left for others to add to their class, automatically making the possible score for others lower? In theory, that's sort of correct. I mean, for example, okay, if you beat Ohio State for Cardinal Tate, that's one less 5-star receiver that Ohio State's going to be able to get. If you beat Ohio State for Samson Okunlola, that's a 5-star offensive lineman that they're not going to be able to get. So in theory, you're onto something, in my opinion. There's enough kids in the South, however, for an Alabama, a Texas A&M, and Notre Dame is not necessarily going to steal that many kids from Bama, right? They're going to take some, we believe, and Bama's trying to take some from Notre Dame. But like last year, for example, A&M was number 1 at 330, Bama was number 2 at 322. So if Bama repeats what they did last year, they're still ahead of Notre Dame, right? And so to your point, there's merit to that. In 2021, Bama had the number 1 class at 327. Ohio State was number 2 at 321. So we've seen years recently where the number 2 class was higher. Now in 2020, nobody got to 320. And so it varies year by year. It just depends on if if Notre Dame hits the inside straight on everybody they want, and they get up to 320 something, there's enough kids out there for an A&M, an Alabama, a team like a Georgia coming off a title to still have enough guys to go out and also get a just as good class. So that's
well, I think also, Brian, it's like, yes, in a vacuum, Notre Dame scoring higher than typically in that scale would take away from others, right? But also, it's also dependent on how other schools are. So, like Clemson obviously loses Brent Venables, for instance, right? And they lose parts of their staff.
Tony
the
Elliott,
right? Yeah, right. So they've lost a bunch of really good recruiters. So them leaving, how much does that knock down Clemson down the peg just naturally, right? That doesn't have that much to do with Notre Dame depreciating their value on the recruiting trail, but just their actual attrition from losing so many coaches. So there's a lot of factors to it, but it's a fascinating question. I do think that there is some merit to saying Notre Dame's level up will take away from others, but also you have to consider there is context of what other schools are doing that are usually big players in the market.
Right.
As well.
Right. So like if Notre Dame finishes with the class we talk about, it hurts Oklahoma's chances of being that high. It hurts Texas's chances of being that high. But the team it hurts the most is Ohio State. It makes it almost impossible for Ohio State to finish with a higher class. Because the thing we have to talk about is we have to go all the way back to the beginning of the conversation of why we think they have a chance to be number 1 is it's an abnormally high year for highly ranked Northern kids. Bama wasn't banking on its class having Cardinal Tate and Samson Okunlola and Dante Moore and Rodney Gallagher and Jason Moore and guys like that, right? They're still going to have those Southern kids that they've been getting, okay? And so Notre Dame's going to be number 1. It's going to be because they get all those they land all those Northern kids. That hurts Ohio State a whole lot more than it hurts Bama or Georgia, right? If Notre Dame does what we think they can do in Texas, that's going to take a little sting out of A&M potentially. But what made A&M number 1 last year wasn't cleaning up in Texas. It was getting Anthony Lucas from Arizona. It was getting Shamar Stewart from Florida. It was getting Anai White from Maryland, D.C. area. They went all over to sign players. And so, you look at it and say, and somebody says it hurts Michigan too. Michigan was never going to be in contention to have a number 1 ranked class. We're talking about the teams that have a shot to finish number 1. But it does hurt Michigan's chances to be that. And Ryan, you and I have talked about this. Before Notre Dame can become the national powerhouse, they have to first become the northern powerhouse. And that means you've got to start beating Ohio State. And I think that to me is, if they're going to finish number 1, that's the team they're going to have to start beating more. Is that guy, is that program. Beat them for Dante Moore, because they wanted Dante Moore. They just couldn't get their foot in the door with him, really. If you've got to beat them for Cardinal Tate, you have to. Chicago's closer to you than it is Columbus. You have to get him. You have to. Coach Easton has to go out and beat Ohio State for Samson Okunlola, right? They have to beat Penn State for Rodney Gallagher. Like, that's the big thing. Texas has been cleaning up, or Ohio State's been cleaning up with big time Texas receivers. There's a couple of them down there. You got to be the school that goes down there and gets those guys this year, not Ohio State. Yeah. So I think that is step 1 for Notre Dame, is making Ohio State be the number 2 team in the North. Once you do that, then you can set your sights on, okay, Bama, here we come, right? Georgia, here we come. And that's really, to me, where this, even if they don't finish number 1, if they're in the top 3 and they're ahead of Ohio State, that to me would send shockwaves to more kids that will matter for Notre Dame than than it would, with some other areas. Because where have we talked about Notre Dame? Notre Dame needs to do better in Maryland, D.C. They got to get any top kids from the Northeast in Pennsylvania. They got to start dipping into Ohio and get the Catholic school kids. They got to go up to the state of Michigan and get big time players. They got to go out to Chicago and get those guys. Well, what's the school right now that's cleaning up in all those areas? It's Ohio State.
Ohio State, yeah. Yeah.
And think of the studs they've got from the DC area recently. I'll give you one. Chase Young. He doesn't suck.
Pretty
right?
good player.
You know what I mean? Like, they just went out and got a stud receiver from Chicago last year. Like, they're cleaning up in those areas. Notre Dame has to now start beating them in those areas. So to me, that's the first thing that happens. And of course, they're going to get a chance to have a statement in that on September 3rd. But, to me, you got to beat them on the recruiting trail first. And they did that a little bit last year. And they've done that now multiple times in the 2023 class already. They got to now keep doing it. And that's going to be key.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, obviously, you mentioned Brandon Vernon, obviously, is one out of Ohio this year. Joshua Burnham was out of Ohio last year, right, which was a big victory for Notre Dame. Actually, no, he was out of Michigan. Excuse me for a second. But I think that it's huge, Brian, because we talked about Cornell Tate, and obviously there's a lot of excitement over Cornell Tate. If coming down to it, it seems Notre Dame and Ohio State are probably the two leaders for Cornell Tate. And with what Ohio State has done, specifically at wide receiver, recruiting and developing. I mean, if Chancey Stuckey, in one of his first victories, is able to say, "I beat Brian Hartline for Cornell Tate," that is a mission, man, and that is a statement victory early on in that tenure. So there's I think that Notre Dame has an opportunity to change a lot of narratives, a whole lot of narratives. And this is a couple statements early on that it seems.
Well, and Texas wants Braylon James. I mean, Steve Sarkisian has a national title under his belt. If you can go down into Texas and beat them for a Braylon James, if you can beat Ohio State for a 5-star receiver they want with what they've done at receiver in recent years, it's not just, hey, you're adding players, Ryan. Your point is they're changing narratives. They really are. They're making, Notre Dame becomes the cool place. That's what happened in 1990. I mean, from like 89 to like 91, 92, Notre Dame was 91 for sure. Notre Dame landed some elite classes because it became the cool place to go to. Right. And that's a key. And what cool means, like, you can go there and win and be a high pick. And that's what we mean by cool. Not like, oh, it's fun. It just means, hey man, like, you can go there and achieve everything you want to go to. Oh, and by the way, there's some added benefits to it. There's a lot of kids that are some kids are never going to care about what Notre Dame can do for them academically. That's why I've always said Notre Dame cannot compete with those big time schools for 5-star basketball players because they can't sell what makes Notre Dame unique, because a 5-star basketball player is going to be in college for 1 year. Doesn't matter what the academic progress, success you have. It doesn't move the needle. And so Notre Dame can't sell that in men's basketball. Women's basketball they can, because most women's basketball players are in college for at least 3 years, right? And so football, you can sell that, and a lot of top players like that. I mean, we just talked about several top highly ranked kids that are very good students. You know what I mean? Like Dante Moore's a 4.0 student. Braylon James is a 5.0. I believe his school district is a 5.0 scale. So there's plenty of kids like that, and I think now it's about, you got to go get them, but it takes work. And so it's going to be about closing. But I have come around to the idea, at least for this 2023 class, that I do believe Notre Dame has an opportunity to get a number 1 ranked class in both areas that matter. The primary area that matters, which is that's a class that can go compete with and beat anybody, right? Practically speaking. And then there's the rankings aspect of it.
Well, I think that Braylon James was a very interesting one too, Brian, because you just keep saying winning battles, right? Like, he's right in the University of Texas backyard. His sister went to the University of Texas, and they are in contention. And again, you said it, they're the leader for him without him even getting to campus yet, right? Which I think, again, that kid, I put out a article last week about they're just want to be in Texas over the last few years, just hasn't seemed to be there. Like, they just don't have a presence. And then all of a sudden you can go to a kid that is playing in University of Texas backyard in the state of Texas that has never visited your campus, and you are the assumed leader even before he visits. I think it just is speaking again more evidence to where this could potentially be going. Now, you have to close on a Braylon James, but
Right.
I think it does speak volumes that just the effort that is putting in on the trails.
Right. So Ryan, let's dive into the Q&A portion of our recruiting show, because there's some interesting aspects to this, because there's a lot I could say about what you just said, because I do think the winning battles thing matters. And last year you got Tobias Merriweather, whose dad grew up a big Michigan fan. Michigan wanted him. You go down to the Southeast and get Jalen Sneed. You go into Michigan's backyard and get a kid in Josh Burnham that grew up a Michigan fan. They won a lot of those battles on defense last year. Tyson Ford was a strong lean to Oklahoma, and he's in Oklahoma territory, in St. Louis, when Marcus Freeman arrived. Junior Tuiamalo was a commit to USC when Marcus Freeman arrived. I mean, Benjamin Morrison has a sister at Michigan, has a sister had a sibling that went to Washington, and they beat both of them for him. And so, yes, you've got to start winning those battles for the kids you don't normally get. That's the key. And so that'll make it interesting. So we want to dive into sort of the Q&A part, right? Now we're going to answer your questions. You can ask team questions, but we're going to have Q&As the rest of the week about that. I think this would be a great time to dive into some recruiting questions. So we got a lot of these things starred, Ryan. Some are questions, some are comments, but let's start off. We have a super chat from AST 12321. Is Nico's situation a seismic shift? Thank you for the super chat, by the way. Is the Nico situation a seismic change to the whole environment, or closer to a case-by-case situation? Not the ideal scenario for the sport either way. He's referring to the report that Nico, the quarterback from California, is getting a multi-million-dollar NIL deal to go to a school. I believe that's going to be Tennessee. So it's being reported. Although I think that was made public for a reason. The reason being, hey, Oregon, now it's your turn. To see what you have to offer. I mean, that's what it is. If we're being honest, this is also why I told you he was never going to be a fit for Notre Dame. I mean, there's a reason we basically ignored him. We did a film breakdown recently, and so while it's being said that he likes Notre Dame, we didn't even we talked about him, but we didn't break down film of him. And this is why he's never going to be at Notre Dame. It's a seismic shift in a lot of ways. Yes, I'm not going to deny that. I think the thing I've always pushed back on is not every kid's going to be looking for that. That's the difference. And some kids understand, like, yes, I may go there and get $2 million, but there's so many other things that aren't going to work for me. But this is going to get really ugly in a lot of ways if it doesn't get reined in by the NCAA, who right now is waiting on the federal government to fix it, which is the stupidest thing ever, because they're not going to fix a darn thing. So I don't see it changing anytime soon. We're going to have to live with this for a while until either the NCAA gets new leadership, or as they're waiting on federal legislation to fix it. Something has to happen, because this can't go on. And what'll happen is as more A&Ms and Tennessees and Oregon start buying players, that's how change happens, because then the blue bloods get pissed off and they start pushing for change, right? When Nick Saban and Alabama and Mike, those people start like, hey, this isn't working out for us too well. That's what hurt SMU. They started beating Texas and Penn State and A&M for kids, and they're like, we can't have this little pipsqueak SMU beating us for kids that we're also trying to buy. So let's get them in trouble. You know what I mean? So you'll see something like that. I just think it's hilarious that Tennessee has the cojones to do this like less than a year after the whole bags of McDonald's cash. And what's the NCAA done about that? Nothing. Right? So as we've told you before, the NCAA doesn't care about anything other than their pockets being lined. That's all they care about. It's all they care about. And, it's the same thing. So, but again, there's this paranoia about, well, what's this mean for this guy or that guy? And I just keep telling you, not every kid is looking for that. Some kids understand that there's a bigger picture here, right? Going to a place that can develop me as a quarterback is more important. If you're a 5-star quarterback, going somewhere that will develop you is a $10 million deal, a 20, 30, 40, $50 million deal, because you're going to be a top 5 pick, as opposed to your $2 million payout to go somewhere else. Now, if some kids think that they can find both, sure, it's going to work out. But, that's the thing that I think we have to point to, is that not every kid's looking for that, because look, folks, kids have been getting bought for decades, and yet Notre Dame still gets players, and other schools that don't buy players still get guys. Every kid's different, and so we gotta stop lumping every kid in this whole. This is how Nico is. There's a reason I said this about Nico at the very beginning, and I didn't say it about Vizina, and I didn't say it about Dante Moore, and I didn't say it about Malachi Nelson. Right, that kid's a different animal, right? And there's other kids like that. So that's my take on that particular situation, Ryan. If you have anything to add to that, feel free.
Yeah, no, I think it's worth noting that there's definitely a shift that's happening, right? Like it's definitely a change in the full sphere of recruiting. But like you said, Brian, I do think it is a case by case situation, right? Like it does not symbolize every player, how they're going to strategize and how they're going to take on the recruiting landscape. So I don't think that it is encompassing of everyone, but I do think that it is definitely going to force some hands here very soon.
Correct. And look, Notre Dame has to be involved in NIL. We've never said Notre Dame doesn't have to be involved. What we've tried to tell you is they're more involved than you think they are, and they're working on doing even more. So Notre Dame is going to be involved here. They're just not going to use it as an enticement. That's my issue with this. I don't care if a quarterback at Notre Dame signs a $2 million deal once he's proven something, right? Like, no problem. If Tyler Buckner goes out and has a phenomenal year and signs a $2 million contract for an endorsement deal, good for you. I truly believe that, because you've earned that, right? The college football is making billions off of you. I'm not a pay the players kind of thing where you have salaries and all that kind of stuff, because once you become an employee, you become fireable. Okay. But it's about, look, if the school's going to put your name on a jersey and make millions of dollars off of it, I'm sorry, you should get some of that. I've always felt that. I'm okay with NIL in theory. I don't think it should be used as an enticement. That's my problem, right? But once these kids get there and earn it, then I'm all for it. Okay, and that's where Notre Dame is going to have their success, is pushing those stories, and that's what they have to do a better job of, in my opinion. They can't sit back and not do anything and expect to get kids. There's going to have to be some level of, hey, this is what's going on. And it's not just important for getting kids. It's important for keeping kids. And I think you're going to see more guys like Isaiah Foskey who are willing to say no to leaving early and being a second-round pick, knowing they can come back to Notre Dame and maybe bump into the first round, because they're still going to make money. We saw, I think it was Hunter Dickinson from Michigan last year mentioned that. Like, the NIL stuff was part of the reason he decided to come back, not just the fact he wasn't going to be a first-round pick, because he could come back and still make money. Mm-hmm. So I think that's where it could even have a greater impact for a place like Notre Dame, is that's how you convince a kid to come back for a senior year or a fifth year. It's like, hey, man, yes, you're passing up a chance to be a second-round pick, which is going to get you millions of dollars, but you're still going to get $250 next year for us. And then we're going to bump you up into the first round because we're going to do this, this, and this. And then so you're going to get both, right? And that's the pitch. That's where Notre Dame is, to me, is going to have more of an enticement when it comes to impact and NIL, as opposed to using it to entice a kid like Nico or somebody else to come to Notre Dame. That's just kind of how I feel about it. Coleman Smith with a question. I'm continuing to wait on an offensive commit. What do both of you think will be who do both of you think will be the next offensive commit? My guess is Jagasaw or Braylon James. What say you, Ryan?
I think Jagasaw is a decent guess, to be honest. I think Braylon James is a good one as well. I do think that, I could see Jagasaw any day now, honestly. Like, I could see him today, tomorrow, a couple weeks from now. It's a little more open-ended, I guess. Braylon, we know, wants to commit before the season, but he said, like, hopefully in the spring, it might go into the summer, late July, early August. Like, he's kind of keeping it like, I'll know when I know type of thing.
Right.
So
I thought that was interesting, though. He followed up on that, Ryan, because we were listening to the audio last night, and Brian Smith was interviewed it, and Ryan put it all together and wrote a really good story about it. But he talked about, late July, early August. He said, but it was like a but, when I know, I'll know. So he's not, if he thinks he knows tomorrow, he's going to commit. If he doesn't really know until July or August, he'll commit then. So it's basically like, look, when I know where I want to be and I'll know, then he'll commit. So I could see him popping after the Notre Dame visit, and I could see him still taking officials in June or July if he's not 100 or in June if he's not 100% certain. That's why this visit this weekend is so important for him.
Very important,
in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think Jagasol is my best guess. My three guys that I view as the three guys that I view as the most likely offensive players to commit to Notre Dame is Jagasol, Dante Moore, and Braylon James. That's my three. That would be my three.
Cool. That's fair.
Just looking at on the offensive side of the ball. Adam Harknett, whatever happened to Kamari Rogers? That was an interesting one because, we saw, I mean, he seemed to really like Notre Dame. He said all the right things about Notre Dame, and he was supposed to come on a visit to Notre Dame, and all of a sudden just dropped him. And from what I'm told, it just really came down to he just kind of wanted to go somewhere where football was king for his responsibilities. And that's just, he didn't feel like Notre Dame was a place where he could, kind of focus his attention on things. Not that he doesn't care about academics, but just it wasn't the driving force behind what he needed to do. And, and he went to Miami. So, and he grew up a Miami fan, I believe, too. So I think that factored in it as well. But yeah, and then of course the knee injury, I think kind of threw things off a little bit as well. But, I think that was really where it came down to. Tyler Almani, any chance the bus, Jerome Bettis, is a part of on-campus recruiting visits this spring? Absolutely, he will be. I'm already told he has been. That's what I've told he has already been. Because the thing about it is he's a student. He's not an alum. I mean, he's an enrolled student at Notre Dame. So that puts him in a whole different category than like Tim Brown, right? Where there's some things Tim Brown can do and some things Tim Brown can't do because he's an alum and all this other kind of stuff. But Jerome Bettis is a student at Notre Dame. So you can utilize him in ways that you can't utilize a lot of things. And from what I'm told, he has been all on board with it so far. All on board with it. And let me just tell you something else. Jerome Bettis, we've been one of many former Notre Dame players. There are going to be so many former Lou Holtz players on campus for the spring game. It is insane. I talked to a buddy of mine last night that played under Coach Holtz, and he's like, yeah, I'm going to be there. And you can't get much further away from South Bend than where he lives. And he's not going to be alone. And trust me, there will be plenty of opportunities for those guys to bump into the recruits that are going to be on campus. There's a reason they're pushing for so many big-time players and commits to be on campus that weekend. And that's why it's going to be huge. I mean, talk about keeping Peyton Bowen and Keon Keeley. That weekend's going to be a big one for that, a really big one for that. And I'm very much looking forward to that. Tyree hit the nitro. Love that name. What D-line position are they looking at Boubacar Traore for, and with Vernon sliding inside? No, they are looking at him as an interior player. They look at him as a D tackle that could maybe even slide inside because he's listed at 6'4", about 255 right now is where Notre Dame has him. He's got a really big wingspan. I could see him. I mean, I think he's a 3 technique by the time he enrolls. I mean, he's already got a bigger frame than what Jason Onye had at the time. He's also, Ryan, I think he's a really powerful kid. He's a really quick, twitchy kid vertically, but he's a little tight in the hips, I think. I don't see him as an edge guy. I don't see him having the ability to bend and get around the corner. I think he's more of a tight quarters guy. So he's a 3 technique nose. Again, how Notre Dame uses the nose. And that'll be determined ultimately by how much he fills out. But I think he's got a huge frame. I think he's going to be an easy 280, 285 easy and be an interior guy. But they are looking at him as an inside guy in the current defense. Ryan, what are your thoughts on him as a player? I know we both watched this film a bit this weekend.
Yeah, no, I think that we agree in the certain sense that, like, I don't think that he's the most lateral, quick, twitchy type of dude as far as like change of direction. But I do think first step is really nice, man. Like he can put you in some bad situations, right? And he's got like you said, he's got a nice frame. He's a really well put together kid already, which is nice to see. Like you can tell I think he spends a little time in the weight room, you know what I mean? And he's a good athlete. I think there's a lot of things that you could do with him positionally, which would be fun. Because like you said, they view him interior player, strong side defensive end, maybe depending on how it develops. So he's definitely more of the interior player comparative to a Brennan Vernon. But I also think that Brennan Vernon, again, I think he gives you that flexibility too. We're kind of moving forward if he can carry the weight like we think he can, right? Because he can play on the outside for sure. There's no doubt. I think he can work inside. Notre Dame just continues to get in good places with versatile defensive linemen who I think can play all over the place. If they're able to land Traore, I mean, again, guy that can play a little bit on the edge, but can play a lot inside. It gives you a lot of versatility defensive line wise.
I was also asked, this has nothing to do with Keon Keeley. It has nothing to do with Brendan Vernon. It has nothing to do with Jason Moore. They just like this kid. They've been recruiting him for a while. They've been recruiting him since Mike Elson was here, and they've never backed off with the coaching change. This is a guy that they wanted. They were a big reason he ended up decommitting from Boston College. We have some intel on him on the board, the message board. I encourage you to check that out. Notre Dame is not the only player for him, but they are a big-time player for him. And this has no impact. This doesn't mean anything about Jason Moore or anybody else. This is just a kid that they like, that they want. Simple as that. Because I've had a few people ask about that. But I think the other thing, too, is the fact that he is twitchy vertically with a combination of heavy hands are the two things that, for me, say that's what makes him an interior guy, assuming he can fill out the frame. Because you can do a lot in tight quarters with as a tight-hipped guy if you've got heavy hands and you've got some twitch. You've got some speed and some got a real thick lower body too, like real strong lower body. I would say thick because, I mean, there's room to put on, but like really sturdy, really strong. Everything helps as well. So he's a good football player. He's ranked in the top 100 by some. He's ranked in like 150 guy. Right now for me, Ryan, he's more of like a 150 guy because he is so raw, but the ceiling is incredibly high in my opinion for him.
Yeah. I think he falls into the developmental type of category, but like the upside is substantial. So I agree.
Right.
I think that, you lean more towards, who was the one that had him a little lower? It was, trying to remember off the top of my head. I think it was.
Here, I can go find out. I'm pretty sure. I think Rivals is the one that has him a little higher. I could be wrong on that, but I'm going to look up this. Just give me a second on him.
Yeah,
I'll look that up.
Yeah, but I do really think that he kind of fits more into that. The long term is going to outweigh the short term with with Boubacar Traore.
So 247 and On 3 have him as a top 100 player. ESPN has him at 190 and Rivals has him at 224. I'd rank him higher than both of those. I wouldn't rank him as high as I wouldn't put him in the top 100 right now. I'm definitely not. He's not so raw that I've got him all the way down to like 190 to 224. He's like more of a 150-ish guy for me, but he's a 150. Right, exactly. But he's a 150-ish guy that I love because right. So the thing is, I don't care as much about the ranking as I care about the projection. And the projection, because what do we start to show off with? Not what guys were ranked, but the practicality of it. Like, I don't care what he's ranked. This guy can ball, right? And that's what I see this kid as. He's probably not a guy that I would rank in the top 100, but he's a guy with a really high ceiling. And that's how you look at it. And I would take a 150 guy with a super high ceiling than a guy ranked 60th that is kind of already, close to what his ceiling is going to be. That to me is how I would always handle those kind of things. So where would you kind of have him slide in there, Ryan? I mean, again, high as 88, as low as 224. Where would he kind of slide in just as a range for you?
He would probably split the difference. I might even be able to go up to like 125 to 150, somewhere in that ballpark. Like, I think that I think the ceiling is substantial again, but there has to be some context to the situation that I don't anticipate him coming in as a true freshman and being a huge impact type of player, right? Like he's more a year 2, year 3. Like that's kind of the wheelhouse that I see for a guy like Traore.
Next question, kind of in line with that, from John A1. How would Irish Breakdown rank the 2023 defensive tackle prospects with current grade and upside? So I'll tell you right now, I don't have current grades for all of the interior guys yet, but we can kind of give you an analysis, just a brief analysis of them, Ryan. So let's just start. We already talked about Traore. Jason Moore, he is a guy that I have graded. I have him as a 4.5 star guy, a 4.5 star guy, which is a top 50 player, is where I have him. So he'd be kind of in like that 40 to 60 range for me, but a 5-star upside guy, because he's another guy that's a tad on the raw side. He's just more advanced than what Traore is. Tad on the raw side as a junior, which you expect, but 6'6". I was told that Notre Dame actually has him. They actually confirmed, like when he visited Notre Dame the last time, he actually confirmed at 6'6" over 250. Like that's impressive. He's a monster and he's athletic. I think he can play the edge. He can play a 5 technique. He can slide inside. He can literally line up everywhere except really Viper. in a traditional Viper sense. You don't want him playing Viper and dropping into coverage and stuff, but he can play every other spot in some role. And he's a really, really dynamic player for me, with an even higher ceiling than where my current grade is for him. Ryan, what's your thoughts on Jason Moore?
You know who he reminds me of, Brian? I don't know if you remember him at Sun, but Carlos Dunlap that came out of Florida a while ago. That's with the Cincinnati Bengals. Like kind of that same big frame, could play on the edge, right? But like sub, he can come inside. And I think that Jason Moore may even be like a full-time interior guy when all is said and done. But I think he's just a really rare type of big framed edge. And I think, I mean, literally, I think he could play on the edge and carry well over 280, but just because the frame he has, because he's just so long, you know, like it's just length everywhere.
The thing I like about him compared to the kid from Massachusetts is I think he's a more fluid athlete. Like he's got a little bit more lateral quickness. He can bend a little bit. He plays with really good pad level when his technique is right. You know, his technique kind of gets him to narrow his base at times and he'll lift up. But when he keeps that base, he can really stay low for a 6'6" kid. So yes, I agree with you. I think he can certainly be an edge guy as a big end. Right, like a big power end, a Khalid Kareem. Like he's a better version of Khalid Kareem. He could be that for Notre Dame. He could also slide inside and be a monster. I think Carlos Dunlap's a good comparison. I think the Notre Dame version of him is Stephon Tuitt. He's a Stephon Tuitt kind of guy, in my opinion. Stephon was stronger at that age because he was more physically advanced. But Jason, to me, is a little bit twitchier, in my opinion, than what Stephon was at the same age. And so that's why I think he could fit there. But I think that to me would, from a Notre Dame standpoint, is the one that makes the most sense. Devin Houston, I have graded him. I have him as a 4-star. I have him as a top 200 to 250 kind of kid is where I have Devin Houston right now. Big kid, pure interior guy, probably a nose in what Notre Dame's defense. A good athlete for his size. I mean, he's a pretty good athlete for that size. But he's got a big old frame. He's like 6'5". He's listed at 270. He looks bigger than that to me. He looks 280, 285 already to me. I could be wrong on that, but he's got a real like big old. There's a picture he took recently with Mike Elson on a visit at Michigan. His older brother is actually a freshman basketball player at Michigan, but he had like these big old giant calves, right, and these big old thighs. I'm like, that's a big boy. But I have him as a 4 with a 4.5-star upside grade. So he's got the upside of a top 50-ish kind of guy. But right now I have him in like that 200. Probably closer to 200 than the 250, but that's where I have him, Ryan. What are your thoughts on Devin Houston as a player and from a ranking standpoint?
Yeah, my immediate thought was he's a top 250 kid, right? Like I don't think that it's somewhere. I think what you're saying is fair, like 200 to 250. I would probably go a little closer to 250 just because I think there is some projection that needs to happen because I mean, he plays base ends for St. James School. And I think that you're projecting him probably more inside. And I think he's got a great frame where the upside is substantial. I think that he can add a ton more weight. I think that he could be that gap penetrating style nose, right? That kind of Notre Dame is kind of moving towards. But obviously there is definitely some projection to him for sure.
Some other inside guys that Notre Dame is looking at. I haven't graded or really looked at Stephylon Green yet. Kid from Georgia they recently offered. I haven't really broken him down. Connor Knight we've looked at. I mean, we both think he's an okay, solid player. He's a nose guard. He's a 3.5-star guy for me, so not a top 300 guy for me at this point in time. Other interior players, obviously, we talked about Boubacar. Colton Vasek and Desmond Umeozulu are two guys that they also recently offered that Notre Dame projects as ultimately being sort of big end 3 technique type of guys. Ryan, have you had a chance to watch either one of those guys? I have not. I have not had a chance to watch either one of those guys yet.
Yeah, I actually watched it. So Desmond he's a pretty twitchy guy, man. I think he's kind of similar style. I mean, so I think that he's a full-time defensive end moving forward. Like, I don't know if he eventually gets to the range where he could be that 3 tech, at least on like a, volume basis anyway. But I do think he's a really twitchy kid. He's a little raw. But, I mean, the first step is substantial. I think he changes direction pretty well. He's got a long athletic frame. So there's a lot of projection with Desmond, but I do think that he has substantial upside. Vasek, I kind of compare a little, Brian, to stylistically speaking. Again, I'm not comparing him and saying that he's going to become this type of player, but he reminds me of Joey Bosa-ish, right? Like
body type wise.
Right. Yeah, long, he could hold a ton of weight. I mean, he's listed at like 230 pounds at 6'6" right now, but this kid could hold a legit 260 plus, and he's just got length everywhere. And I think that his closing speed is really nice, but I don't know if I would call him the most dynamic athlete overall, right? Like bend is solid, nothing special. First step is good, not great. Everything is just really solid. And I think he's going to be a really good run defending defensive end that can move inside, on a situational basis. But I think that you're going to think of him more as a run stopping defensive end who also I think does have some. I think he's going to be able to cause some havoc, but maybe not be a high volume sack type of player.
All right, hopefully, John, that gave you a little bit of a taste of what we're thinking about with those guys. John A1 also says, I'm really hoping that Notre Dame lands a number of pure football players, athletes. Really want to see Notre Dame land Impemba, Ronan Hannafin, Darren Gillette, and Jaden Alsbury. They can do different things as physically dominant players. I just don't think they can land off. I don't think roster management wise, taking all four gets you into a little bit of a hairy situation. Because now you're saying they can all do different things, but they all four project ideally at a similar position. So I don't know if they can get to all four of those guys. I mean, part of it's going to depend on what happens at receiver, because I don't think Ronan Hannafin's a safety. I guess that would be part of it. Is if you think Ronan Hannafin can play safety, then you could maybe make it work. But if he's going to be on defense, receiver, it just depends on how they finish, right? And so I just don't know if you can land all four of them. I'll say this: if I could, I would. If I can make it work numbers wise, if I can make it work, there's not one of those kids I want to say no to, Ryan. It's just practically speaking, I don't know if that's doable. But if you can land three of that four, that's really good. I mean, like to John's point, those are some really athletic football players who can do some different things.
No, for sure. And I mean, John, just for some context, I mean, Notre Dame is in the leader, I would say, for Samuel Impemba. I'd say they're the leader for Ronan Hannafin as it stands. Darren Gillette, they are trending in the right direction. Need to get him on campus, obviously. Jaden Osbury, probably a little bit more of an unrealistic one. So I don't think they get one. I don't think they get all four of those in that situation just in general. But I agree with you. I think all four of those, I would say, I mean, Ronan Hannafin's a different animal a little bit because he may end up at wide receiver. But if they're ending up on defense, most likely they start at rover, right? And then, but I think that each of them has a different designation as far as what the secondary position might be. And I think Impemba gives you a lot of flexibility because he might end up being a Viper, man. Like he might,
right.
And he'd be a really good one potentially. Hannafin, I view as a rover as well. I don't if he ends up on defense, but I don't know if he has. Like I think that he can hold a substantial amount more weight, but I don't know if he's a true like rover will type of player. Like he might just be a rover, and that's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's fine. Exactly. But I mean, Gillette, you could sell me that Gillette ends up being a Will Mike down the line. Like I would be like, yep, I could see that. 100%.
He's another guy I could see as an edge rusher, right? Like, and the thing about Impemba is if Keon goes somewhere else, then I think Impemba probably moves there. Their thing is if they have Keon and Impemba, they're going to find ways to get both of them on the field together.
Sure.
Right. That's the thing. And so that'll make it very interesting. But yeah, Gillette to me, with how long he is and how twitchy he is, he's another guy that on third down, I'm putting him at the line of scrimmage. I'm having him and Keon, and I mean, he's a real twitchy kid with some explosiveness. So that's a really interesting group. And of course, as Ryan mentioned, we could always talk about Ronan Hannafin being a receiver. That's the other part. We can talk about Samuel Impemba being a tight end. So there's a whole lot of things that factor into. This is my favorite tweet, my favorite so far today, from Delusional Jack Cohn fan. This is awesome. Number one class equals the Jack Cohn effect. I love it. I'm all for it, man. Y'all know I love Jack Cohn. It's just like that's having some fun. We have some fun here. I love that. Brian Schulte says, hey guys, wanted to say thanks for all the great content on the board, especially the offensive intel last week. Any idea when the D intel might come out? Good luck with baseball. To Vince. I'll let Vince know that you said that. I just don't have enough to put into a piece right now, and I'm still trying to do some digging to get more defensive intel. So it'll come out when I feel like I have enough that makes it worthwhile. I'm hoping to have something here over the next couple of days, but I don't want to promise something that I can't deliver. And so if I can get more intel, I have a little bit, right? And then if we get to spring ball and I haven't added more to it, I'll probably put out what I have. But right now, I just don't have enough on defense to put out. I was able to gather a lot more on offense. And so that's why we put that offensive intel feature out last week. And I think there's a lot of good stuff in there. I was just surprised at how excited some of the people I've talked to are, because some of the people I've talked to about the offense are normally naturally pessimistic people. And they were really fired up, like really fired up. So it was very interesting to kind of be like, wait a minute, hold on. You said what? Like, okay, I just want to make sure I heard you correctly, because you don't normally say things like that.
Yeah.
Florida, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say naturally you would have a little more intel potentially on offense because there's only 2 offensive commits right now, right?
That's
so
right.
That's
right. And this was about the team stuff on offense. But yeah, it's funny because like the defensive intels on recruiting is about the guys, like they're already kind of in the class. Offense is about the team. So we'll hopefully get some more. But we had some nuggets on the offensive recruiting last week too, because we had a recruiting thing last week as well, which was interesting. So we had a lot of intel stuff last week. But when I can get some good stuff, because like Ryan, the thing is, I don't like to put stuff out just to have an intel piece that people click on, right? Like I want to make sure it's good. I've been able to get it from multiple people and just try to make sure things are confirmed and not just like take just one person's view. I try to get stuff from multiple people, and I just haven't been able to get enough on defense just yet. Florida Irish, super random question, but do you think there could be a meaningful impact to the vibe on campus based on how the basketball teams played against Rutgers and Alabama? Yes, there can be a meaningful vibe to on campus. Is it a meaningful vibe in that regard, in regards to it influences recruit one way or another? Probably not. But I mean, if there's energy on campus, kids feel that. Even if they don't really care about Notre Dame's basketball team, they're going to feel that. So anytime there's energy on campus, I think that's a good thing for recruiting.
For sure.
I just, I don't know how much beating Rutgers is going to impact that. Was on Wednesday. But then going into the next round, like, that's the play-in game. Was it the first 4, right? Isn't that what they call it?
Yeah.
And then if you then go beat Bama, who's what, the 6th seed? I think Bama's Notre Dame's an 11, right?
Good team, yeah.
Go beat Bama.
I'll say this, Brian. Like I actually have been watching a little more college basketball this year. I used to be huge when I was younger, and then I kind of fell out of it for a little bit. But I'll say this, man: if Notre Dame is able to get to Alabama, that's gonna be an interesting game, man. Because Alabama is very different. Like they kind of want to run and gun a little bit. I think Notre Dame's gonna slow the pace down a little bit. That's an interesting game, man. Interesting matchup.
Yeah, you just never know what version of Notre Dame you're gonna get. That's the problem, and. So it makes it a little bit of a frustrating team to watch, but also at times a really fun team to watch. But yeah, that 11 seed was tough. That was like Michigan made it at like 17 and 14. Like what?
Yeah.
Whatever. Tyree hit the nitro. What receiver who left the roster would you like to have back if you could? Personally, I'd love it if Keys was still on the roster and see what he could do. So I think he's referring to guys that have transferred that still have eligibility remaining, not like Will Fuller. But Keys is an interesting one. The reason I wouldn't go with Keys is because I feel like they already have a lot of slots.
Mm-hmm.
I'd probably look at a bigger guy.
Jordan Johnson was the first one that popped in my head.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Kevin Austin would be probably. I mean, if I'm going to cheat and kind of take him, because even though he went pro, he didn't transfer.
Yeah, eligibility left. Yeah,
because he said who left the roster. He left the roster. I mean, I'd go with Kevin Austin. But if you're talking about transfers, which is what I think the spirit of the question was, I'd probably still go Jordan Johnson, because I feel like if Jordan Johnson would have stayed at Notre Dame, it would have shown me that he's kind of made some maturity decisions that are good. It's kind of like what I've said about Aaron Lynch. If Aaron Lynch would have stayed at Notre Dame, he would have been a monster in a first-round draft pick. And they say, well, he didn't. It's because staying at Notre Dame would have meant he did grow up and didn't make the mental mistakes and emotional maturity mistakes that he ended up making that cost him so much, which he still made into his NFL career. If he would have made the right decision and stayed at Notre Dame and grown up, then he would have been special. Because, I mean, he's the most talented defensive lineman I've ever seen in a Notre Dame uniform. I mean, and that includes Justin Tuck. Just physical gifts. He's the most gifted lineman I've ever seen at Notre Dame. And to me, Tuck's the only one that's in the same ballpark, in my opinion. I mean, he made people not care about Stephon Tuitt in 2011. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just saying, right? That's how good he was. But I think that's kind of how I see view Jordan. Jordan Johnson's not in the same universe as Aaron Lynch as a prospect. Don't get me wrong. I'm just making the point, like, if he would have made some better decisions, I think it would have resulted in him being a better player at Notre Dame, and he would have helped. So, and they need more of that outside kind of guy. But honestly, to me, Kevin Austin would have been the only one that would have been a needle mover, like a true needle mover for me, in my opinion, because he's already, I mean, we know what he can do. Gideon Rosa just signed up for the boards for the first time because I had to know about the intel everyone's been talking about. That has me fired up. My question would be, which one? The team intel that we put up last week, the recruiting intel that we put up last week? Like, we put up some stuff, Gideon. So I'm glad you enjoyed it, and I'm really appreciate you signing up. And everybody else, sign up. Boards.irishbreakdown.com. You're missing out if you're not on there. It's all about the boom. If we get Keeley and Pemba, Moore, Tate, and Vernon gets bumped to 5-star, finally, we will have the number 1 class. I don't see Brendan Vernon getting bumped up to a 5-star. Number one, I don't think he's a 5-star recruit. I definitely think he's a top 100 guy. But I said at the time I didn't think he was a 5-star recruit. But he's really good. But now that he's committed to Notre Dame, he's not. If Brendan Vernon wants to go up in the rankings, start floating rumors that he's looking at other schools. That's how you get bumped up in the rankings.
It's going to flip to Ohio State.
Exactly. And Alabama's coming calling, right? Like, just float those rumors to people, even though it's not true, and see what happens to his rankings at that point in time. I mean, it's going to take a lot more than that, though. That's the thing that we broke down early in the show. It would take a lot. Like, it's not just about the 5 stars. I mean, we've seen teams land 3 and 4 5-stars and not finish with top ranked classes. It's got to be a combination of the high level recruits, which are the 5-stars and the top 50 guys. But Ryan, it also takes, you've got to have a lot of top 100s and top 250 guys as well. And I think for me, that's the kind of thing that I look at and say, you have to understand that there's more to it than just the 5s. I mean, Penn State last year had 3 5-star recruits and they finished 6th. You know, I mean, so it's going to take more than that. Georgia last year had 3 5-star recruits and they finished 3rd. Mm-hmm. In 2021, Georgia had 4 5-star recruits and they finished 4th. Miami had 2 5-star recruits and they finished 11th. So it can't just be the top level guys. And, you know, again, I could do this all day. Clemson in 2020 had 5 5-star kids and they finished 3rd. That year, Oregon had 3 5-star recruits and they finished 12th, right? Because the problem is they had only 7 4-stars and 12 3-stars. So it's always going to be about, you have to have the balance and the high level impact. It has to be both. You can't just have the really good players. Ohio State had 3 5-stars in 2019 and they finished 14th. You know, so again, it has to be a combination of both. You do both, and then you've got a shot. But you also can't be number 1 without those guys. That's the other flip side, Ryan, is you can't not get those guys and be number 1. You have a better chance of being number 1 there than you do not getting them and trying to be number 1. It's just not going to happen. The way that the point system is especially set up. Benji, is there a possibility that some guys not even on the radar right now see guys like Moore, Tate, Keeling, and Pemba and somewhat thinking, I want to be a part of that? Yes, Ryan, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Go ahead and speak to that one, Ryan, because I think we both are on the same page on that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, it's not just a needle mover to the guys on the board, right? Like, it's a national needle mover. Dante Moore is a 5-star national player. Like, this is substantial. So guys that Notre Dame has maybe offered that maybe they haven't had, you know, the best as far as interaction, as far as, you know, getting within the top leaders, I think it will resonate with them. I think players that Notre Dame is, you know, I think that there's going to be feedback from all over the place. I don't think that this is just just for Cornell Tate. This is just for this one player. It's just for this 2 player. Like, I think that this is going to resonate across the landscape. And not only that, other teams are going to take notice too. Obviously, other programs are going to take notice. This is a needle mover in all sense of the word, needle
mover. All right, let's get to the next one. Irishman 7114. To me, the class will be defined by closing and getting Dante Moore, Cornell Tate, Samuel Pemba, and Jason Moore, assuming we keep everyone else that we have. Would you say that's fair?
Fair to a degree. I mean, yeah,
To a
it's
degree, yeah.
yeah,
I mean, there's no
yeah,
offensive lineman in there.
sure.
I just can't get one. Like if it's Cardinal Tate and then a bunch of okay guys, that's not moving the needle for me. It's got to be Cardinal and Braylon James and a Rodney Gallagher, right? Like you've got to have some offensive linemen in there, right? There's not. I need to see another DB in there, right? Like they've got to get one more good DB, right? But to a degree, I mean, you're close, Irishman. You're close. It's just it can't ever, like, sometimes that's what I think sometimes we focus on, like, well, they got this great player, but yeah, the guys with them aren't any good though, right? So, if you get Cardinal Tate and the three other okay receivers, like when you're playing Bama in a few years and Tobias Merriweather's gone and he's in the NFL now, it's like, okay, well, they're just going to triple team or double team Cardinal Tate and say, we dare you to beat us with Daniel Smith or, John Goodman or something like that, right? Like you need to make sure that it's who you want to put teams in a pick your poison scenario. That's what made Ohio State so good. Who do you want to not get beat by? So you go into the bowl game and Utah's like, we're not going to let this guy beat us. And so somebody else steps up and has a big day. Or you go into a game, we're not going to let Garrett Wilson or Chris Olave beat us. Okay, so Jackson Smith and Jigba is going to lead them in receptions and catches and receiving yards last year. You know what I mean? Like, that's where you want to be. Okay, you want to take Devontae Smith out. First of all, that's harder to than you think, but that means John Mechie is going to have. I've shared this story before. When I was at Duquesne, we had 3 great receivers, and there was a game where we had a kid, it was a burner. We were playing. I think it was, can't remember, St. Peter's maybe. I forget who it was, but they basically said we're not going to let Yard and Brantley beat us. So they put a nickel, or they put like a slot guy, a corner, and a safety over Yard wherever he went. Well, we figured this out after like 2 or 3 series. Like, so if we put in the boundary, they put those 2 guys on top of them. We put in the slot, they put those 2 guys. It was the stupidest thing I've ever saw. So what we started doing is manipulate. We put Yarden where we wanted to have the double team, and we would go ISOs over here. You know what I mean? Like, but you want to put teams in that kind of quandary where who are you going to try to take out? Got to take somebody out. Can't let all 3 of them beat you. And I think that's where it's got to be. It can't just be Carnell. It's got to be Carnell and Braylon and Gallagher and Greathouse or Elsie or whoever else. It's got to be a deep, deep class. To me, that's where it's got to be. Matt D says EJ Holland is finally starting to become very, very concerned that Notre Dame may be a real threat to get Dante Moore. I'm just going to say this. I don't care to speak to him a whole lot, but he's always known that. He just was doing that stuff for clickbait. He's not that stupid, and he's not that bad at his job that he just now came around to the reality that Notre Dame is a major player. It's called clickbait. He doesn't say stupid things, so people react to it, and he gets attention, and they click on the stories. Simple as that. It's a really easy act to see through. But he's not just now coming around. He's just now telling you that he's coming around. That's the difference. Jay Wiki Jr., if we get Cardinal Tate, does this also help us getting Dante? Like how we assumed it would help us getting Tate if we get Dante. So I don't see any scenario in which Cardinal Tate commits before Dante Moore.
That's what I was about to say. I think that we will have a decision on Dante before we have a decision on Cardinal. Yeah, that's.
And for people that join late, we don't think, because the other thing is you kids don't usually tweet out when a kid has not put a top list out and he says big news coming. First thing you do. So here's a little trick for y'all. First thing you do when a kid tweets out big news is coming is look, see who he tagged in it. So in the one in Carnell, for example, he tagged Hayes Fawcett. That means Hayes Fawcett is putting an edit together for his top group, right? So then so that's one thing. But then you look and say, has this kid put out a top list before? More often than not, if a kid is going to let everyone know that a big thing is coming, he's already put out a top list. So normally in those instances, when he says big news coming, it's a ranking. I'll be shocked if Cardinal Tate doesn't commit on TV or something. Like that's the other thing is like it's not going to be like oh, by the way, I'm just going to drop a commitment tomorrow. He's going to be on CBS Sports or ESPN or something else like that. Same with Dante Moore. Dante's not going to, I don't think, is he's going to randomly put a tweet out, oh, by the way, I've committed to such and such. It's going to be, I think, public. And so that's the other part of it. I just don't see a scenario in which, and the other thing too is Dante Moore Cardinal Tate is a social media savant, in my opinion. He knows how to manipulate buzz about him. And I say that with the utmost respect and in complimentary fashion. There's no way he tweets, I'm going to Notre Dame tomorrow, and then tweets big news coming, and he's going to commit somewhere, right? It's going to be a top list. And so we expect it to be a top 3, which any of you that were on the message board or on the Notre Dame message board already knew that this was coming around the time. What Sean reported was around the time that he makes his visit to Notre Dame. You can also expect a top 3 to come out. So just Ryan, it's another reason you got to be on the message board. Right?
Just got to sign up for the message board, man.
Sign up. It's
$4.99
$4.99 a month or $49.99 a year, which makes it less than $4.99. If you sign up for an annual membership, it makes it less than $4.99 a month. And we don't have to offer you a deal. Other people are offering like 50% off just to get down to our rate. But when that 50% goes away and the promo is over, you're back up to paying twice as much for that content. I'm just saying. Mm-hmm. Ethan Bodner, this is a good question, Ryan. And we've talked about this in the past, but I want you to answer it again. And see, because I think you and I are going to be on the same page. If we Notre Dame were to lose to Ohio State in the opener, would that hurt our chances with the Northern guys in the future or not?
So look, I'm a big proponent of momentum. Football, in my opinion, is a game of momentum, and recruiting is a game of momentum as well, right? There is momentum that is being built. Everyone is excited about what Coach Freeman is doing on the recruiting trail, and they are excited about what he can do at Notre Dame. And that's why we are seeing the quick turnaround to the #1 class by multiple recruiting platforms for 2023. That's why you're seeing it, because he is using that momentum to kill it on the recruiting trail with his staff. That is happening, right? So if they go to Ohio State in the shoe and they have a bad showing, I know it says lose, so lose could be by 1 point, 2 points, whatever it is. But let's say that they do not have a great showing against Ohio State. I believe it will stall momentum slightly, right? Like for a second, you'll be like, okay, and some players are going to think, right? The recruits are going to think, and they're going to be like, oh, maybe I should take a second look here, or maybe I should slow this process down, or whatever it might be. Like there's going to be some thought process there. But long term, I don't think that it's going to be the end all be all, because it's one football game, right? It's the beginning of a process. So I do think that it would have some stalling momentum type of aspects to it, but I don't think that it would be an absolute killer. Honestly, players want to see the product. They want to see how they play. So it is going to have some stay power in that sense.
Yes, agree with you completely. They can't lose in an ugly fashion. That's the thing. It's like, to me, we've talked about this before. Clemson taking Alabama down to the wire in 2015 played a big role in creating a lot of positive momentum for that program, because it was like, hey, we can go toe to toe with them. Let's go out there next year and do it. It was on the recruiting trail, and it was also when you look at just the vibe of the team, the vibe of the program. So yes, I do believe that a win obviously is a huge needle mover. But your question was more about, well, what if they lose? If they lose in a 4-quarter battle, to me, it doesn't stall momentum at all, because you're going to Ohio State. No one expects you to go to Ohio State and beat them, right? If you give them everything you can handle, it's like, hey, you know what? This is why we need you. Because when they come back to our house next year and we got you with us, these cats don't have a chance. That's a great recruiting pitch. They have out-recruited us every single year for how long, and we just went to their place and took them down to the wire with a brand new starting quarterback. You know, that's the key. I'll say this, though. If you're going to lose to Ohio State in that fashion, you have to beat Clemson. You can't lose to both of them. You can't. And so that would be the other part is that would hurt. That would stall the momentum, in my opinion. If you lose to both of those teams next year, it would absolutely stall the momentum, in my opinion. Guinea pig clips. Does landing Dante Moore affect Julian Sayin? Is he patient enough to sit on the bench that long? Well, number one, I don't think it necessarily. I mean, if Julian Sayin is a competitor, he's not going to assume he's going to sit the bench. Number one. Right. Number two, could it affect him? Sure. I mean, it could affect him. But look, Julian Sayin is saying all the things he's saying now about Notre Dame, knowing that they're going to get, a top quarterback. I mean, the rumblings are you're either going to get Dante Moore, Chris Vizina, that kind of thing. So most great players are good competitors. I've also said in the past that it's hard to get 5-star players and a quarterback in back-to-back years. So it could make it challenging. But, I mean, the kid seems to like Notre Dame a lot. I don't think, however, he's necessarily the guy at quarterback for Notre Dame in that class. I think there's other guys they like as much, if not more, in that class as well. Matt D with a super chat. Matt, thank you so much. He says, it's good to be back here. What position do you see getting a commit at next? My guess is O-line.
we already talked about.
Hmm.
I think both of us kind of agreed that maybe Charles Jagasaw might be the next commit,
Hmm.
so that would make it offensive line in that sense.
Yeah. He's kind of a different cat. Like I could see him just not committing because he just doesn't, just not really fully engaged in the recruiting process yet. And I could see him committing tomorrow. I mean, I think Notre Dame's in a really, really good position there.
Hmm.
Matt also says to make sure that you hit the like buttons, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a live show. Join the IB message boards. It's worth the money, and you don't get crystal balls. You get legit information. He's not wrong, Ryan. He's not wrong.
Not wrong.
Appreciate you, Matt. Guinea pig clips. What description best fits Dante? A, Notre Dame is in the mix, but there's a long way to go. B, Notre Dame is in the lead, but Dante wants to visit other schools before committing. Can I throw a C up there?
I was about to say, can we throw another option?
Yeah. If those are the two options, is B. I think Notre Dame is in the lead, but yes, there were some other visits he's had planned that I think he wants to make, but one of them he's already made. That was LSU, but yes, I definitely not A. That no. As I said in I think last week, Ryan, I will be surprised if Dante Moore's not committed somewhere by the end of April.
Agree.
Very
there.
surprised.
Yep. Yeah, I would definitely guinea pig. I would definitely like to add a C to that one. But out of these two, I would 100% say B. Notre Dame is definitely in the lead, in my opinion, for Dante Moore.
Got a couple Peyton Bowen questions. Mo No Lur, what do you think the factors are that affecting Bowen's wavering on his Notre Dame commitment? Who do you replace him with if necessary? And then Timeout Tom asks, is NIL money the bottom line why Peyton Bowen continues to look at other colleges? I want to answer that one first. No, that's not the reason he's looking around. Back to this question, Ryan, what do you think are the factors that are most affecting his Peyton Bowen wavering on his commitment?
I mean, I think it's a combination of everything. I mean, one, he's a Texas kid coming all the way up north, right? I mean, I think that's a big conversation. His quarterback is now going to Oklahoma, right? The Jackson Arnold thing. I don't know if that's a huge point of emphasis for why, the conversation might be happening. But I mean, honestly, it's just becoming more of a consistent thing across the board. Like commitments, I think aren't as big a deal as they used to be, right? Like at the time, he loved Notre Dame. He committed to Notre Dame, and I still think he loves Notre Dame, but I think that he's just kind of been very open to the process that, like, this isn't just because I made a verbal commitment doesn't mean that it's the end all be all. Like, I'm still allowed to take my visits. I'm still allowed to do my due diligence. I'm still allowed to do my homework. So I think he's mostly just playing the process. I mean, I would like that it would be a little firmer if you make a commitment, right? But I can't blame the kid for doing what he's doing. He didn't sign paperwork. He didn't sign on the dotted line. He's doing all that good thing. So I think there's a few different factors, and I think the proximity and just kind of playing the process are probably the two biggest things.
Yeah, I think the quarterback relationship's a big one because I think right now the school I'm most concerned with is Oklahoma.
Sure.
And look, sometimes kids get caught up in the moment. They get caught up in the moment. They make a commitment. I think sometimes these kids get talked into making a commitment, not even just by schools, but by services that people, networks that want them to do it on their TV channel, and that's the reality of it. And we know that people talking kids into waiting to do it at an all-star game. We know that happens. So I think there's a lot of factors, but look, sometimes circumstances change, right? And just, hey, I was feeling Notre Dame, but man, I just, my buddy's committed to Oklahoma now. My brother's been offered by this school or that school. And I just really want to make sure. And I also think Peyton Bowen's a really smart, if you ever talk to him, he's a really smart, thoughtful kid. And I think he's in a situation like this is a big decision, and I want to make sure it's the right one. Now, my wish would be that you just don't commit in the first place, but it is what it is. I just think it's about wanting to make sure he's made the right choice. And I think Brian Smith is correct that it's more right. A commitment is more like, okay, we've established who the leader is in this instance, as opposed to, okay, this kid's not going anywhere. And look, my honest opinion is, I wish when kids made a commitment, that commit was honored, which means don't make it till you know where you want to go, right? But at the same time, as you said, they haven't signed anything on the dotted line, and they're going into a school where the odds of a kid playing for a position coach for 4 years now are way lower than they were 10, 15 years ago. And you almost have to assume that you're not going to play for the position coach that you're going to play for in college. I mean, that's how bad it's getting, right? And so if these kids need to take some time to figure it out, I don't care. All I ask from these young men is just be upfront and honest with your coaches to let them know what's going on, right? Just because they don't always let you know what's going on, don't double the mistake and just, hey, look, Notre Dame, here's where I'm at. I want to visit these schools and this is where I'm at and it's all good. And just be upfront about it as you would want them to be with you, right? If they're recruiting another kid at your position. I wish we demanded more honesty from people. That's my big thing. But it's hard for me to hold a 16, 17, 18-year-old accountable for not being upfront and honest. And I'm not saying Peyton's doing that. I'm saying that's what the expectation would be when we can't get coaches to be upfront and honest about things. So that's a different issue for a different day. A couple more. Demetrius Rex. Does Dante Moore have a date locked in to visit? He doesn't have one locked in to visit yet, but as of right now, the expectation is that he will be on campus on March 26th, but it's not set in stone yet. That's the target date as of right now. Guinea Pig Clips. How often do coaches talk about how good of a strength conditioning program Notre Dame has while recruiting? Constantly. If there was one topic that's not directly related to the position that they talk about the most, I would argue that would be it. That the strength conditioning program would be it. Even just as much, if not more, even than the academic piece. I think that's a big one. Ethan O'Connor asked, thought about this yesterday. Does Tobias Merriweather remind you of Equanimous St. Brown? In some ways, I think Tobias is a little bit more of a fluid athlete than Equanimous. Equanimous is longer. I mean, he's very long. Yeah. There are some similarities to their game, Ryan. I don't know if I would say that there's a lot other than the fact they're both kind of tall. I think Equanimous was more of a boundary guy. I think Tobias is more of a field guy. He's a guy that can do more after the catch. Equanimous was more in the line of, now he can do more after the catch than like a Miles Boykin, but he was more like a Chase Claypool, Boykin type, in that his work was being done up to the catch point. But to me, Tobias is just a better version. If they are similar, he's just a better version in my view. I like DQ coming out. He was a top 100 guy for me, top 100 to 125 guy for me. Tobias is a top 50 guy for me. But I think their game's a little different. I think at the same age, I feel like Equanimous was a little bit better at winning those contested throws, where Tobias is a more advanced route runner than Equanimous was. But size-wise, there's some similarities. But other than that, that wouldn't be the first comparison that I would make for Tobias. Thoughts on that, Ryan?
Yeah, no, I think when you're comparing them to those two, I would say Equanimous was much more vertical player, right? Like he could win down the field with just pure speed. He was going to stay on a vertical third. He wasn't an incredibly flexible guy. While I think Tobias is the complete opposite. Like I think that kid is a legitimate route runner. He can get in and out of breaks. I think that his route tree is going to be a little more extensive than EQ's in that sense. And I think that he can also do some things when you talk about alignment versatility. Like I think he could line up inside, outside a little more than EQ. Like I think I consider EQ very kind of traditional Green Bay Packer, which makes sense because that's the team that valued him so high, right? Like you're going to play him outside the numbers and he's going to work vertical to back shoulder. Like that's kind of what I see with Equanimous St. Brown.
Yep.
Actually, Brian, it's kind of weird. Like, I mean, so his younger brother, Amon-Ra, is much shorter, but like stylistically, I think him and Tobias are a lot more similar, if that makes sense, because he's more of a route runner, technician type of player.
Yeah. And I'd say Osiris was closer to Tobias too. Not nearly as talented, but just stylistically was probably closer as well. He's the often overlooked member of that trio. Yeah, that's a good observation because there is some things he can do after the catch that I think are similar to what Tobias can do after the catch as well. Yeah, it's a really good observation because a lot of times we look at games, we say, well, let me find someone who's similarly sized. It's not always the case, right?
Right.
Alex B asks about Jaden Lamar and Justice Haynes. Ryan, you're up.
Yep. So I'm getting actually with Jaden Lamar today. I would say that last time I talked to Jaden, I thought there was interest there for sure, but it is now obviously with the changing from Lance Taylor to Coach McCullough, that was a little bit of a transitional period because Jaden Lamar really, really liked Coach Taylor. He liked him a lot because he liked his background as a running back and receiver coach, because Jaden's kind of that all-purpose type of back. So he really liked that type of profile. Have to catch up with him and see what the recent of him is. I would say Justice Haynes, it's just a pipe dream at this point, in my opinion. I think that he's going to end up at Georgia, most likely. His father's from Georgia. He's been to Georgia many times. He's very vocal about liking Georgia. I'd say it's a Georgia. Maybe Clemson might get into that conversation, but I don't envision Justice Haynes being a real player for Notre Dame.
I think Jaden Lamar likes Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame likes Jaden Lamar. I'm a long way away from thinking Notre Dame's his leader or anything like that. I think let's see him get back on campus first and see how that goes. And like you said, start to develop that relationship. A couple more we'll get to here. Some good questions here that I want to get to. Number one, guinea pig clips. Ryan and I were talking about this before the show. Do you guys still think Keon Keeley stays with Notre Dame? Personally, I do, but I want to know what you guys have to say.
Yes. I mean, I've talked to Brian about this many times, like not just recently, right? Like I have not wavered one bit from Keon Keeley being in the Notre Dame class. Again, Coach Elston leaves, defensive lineman that was already committed takes his visits. I mean, at some point, man, like the guy that you were talking to had been there for a long time, all of a sudden is out of the picture, had been your main recruiter, right? So like, I mean, for a second there, you got to.
And you felt his coaching style really fit with your game. That's the other thing. Right?
Exactly. So, I mean, there has to be some context to why Keon Keeley was feeling the way he did. And I think people have to understand that a little more. That being said, Keon Keeley handles his business like he is a Notre Dame dude, right? Like he is a Notre Dame commit. You see him actively recruiting. You see him actively on there, put in the clover up there on social media. Like he acts like a Notre Dame commit. He's going to be back on campus for the spring game. I am not worried about Keon Keeley being in the class. I think that he is firmly committed to Notre Dame. And
he's been up front. I mean, he's been up front with Notre Dame about everything he's going to do. I've been told that Keon they knew he was going to visit Bama. They knew he was going to go to Florida. He's been very upfront with them. And kids when I get nervous is when a kid stops talking to the staff. That's when I get a little bit nervous. Like the first red flag I had about Peyton Bowen was when I found out the staff didn't know he was taking that first visit to Oklahoma. He just kind of tried to sneak on campus. You can't do that really anymore because someone's going to find out and someone's going to tweet about it and someone's going to have it on a message board or something like that. You just can't do that, right? And so when a kid's I don't want them to know I'm doing this, that's a big red flag for me. From everything we've been told so far, Keon has not been that. He's been, and that says a lot about Keon too. Like it says a lot about another reason why I think he's such a Notre Dame kid. And Peyton Bowen is Brian Smith said this in his intel piece. That's a Notre Dame kid in every style of the that you can think of. It's just now up to Marcus Freeman and his staff to convince him that he's a Notre Dame kid. Where Keon's already convinced. I just think with Keon, it's about, okay, do I really want to go away from the South? And Keon hasn't been on campus in a long time, right? It's been a while since he's been on campus. So I think as long as he gets back on campus again, I'm not concerned about him, to be honest with you, at this point in time. Couple more. Michael Parks, I just had to get this in there. Irish Breakdown is the best. I appreciate that very, very much. And Andre Neely says, Phil Picciotti, the big linebacker from Pennsylvania, is he visiting? Andre, they are now off of recruiting Phil Picciotti. Once they got they basically came down to, do we push for Phil Picciotti or do we take Preston Zinter? The staff like Preston Zinter better. They like his upside better, I should say. So they decided to take him. And once they took him, they called off the visit for Picciotti that was scheduled for. He had one scheduled. I'm trying to remember. He had a visit scheduled that they kind of canceled, and they're not recruiting him anymore. So all the guys they're recruiting now are like Rover to Will types. Picciotti is a Mike, and they've already got a Mike in this class in their view in Preston Zinter. So that one is done. Michael Campbell says Tobias Merriweather is to T. Higgins is similar to T. Higgins when he was at Clemson. That's been my comp from day one for me. Style of play wise, body type, athleticism, although I think Tobias is faster than T was. But that has been my comp from day one, is he reminds me a lot of T. Higgins. Now, Ryan made the face he made because Ryan doesn't like T. Higgins very much. But for me, I love T. Higgins. And I think that's probably the guy, because I viewed T as a field guy, not so much a boundary guy. But I think Tobias is actually a little more athletic than T, and I think T's bigger than Tobias was. But I think their games are very, very similar, in my opinion. Very, because T was a 4.59 guy or something like that at his pro day, 4.57 or something like that. He wasn't a
Yeah.
burner, but
No.
he's a really good football player, and that's how I see him. Thoughts on that, Ryan?
Yeah, no, I just think of Merriweather a little more of a flexible route runner than T. That's all. But I see some comparisons as far as like
I agree with
the
that.
body composition. Like they have similar frames, and
Mhm.
T was a little taller, but like they kind of have that like lean looking frame, and they
Mhm.
kind of sneak up on you, man. Like they might not be the fastest timed 40 dudes, but like they just kind of gain some
Mhm.
separation on you out of nowhere. So I definitely get some parts of it for sure.
It's like with T, the funny thing is I had a buddy of mine, he's like, T really wasn't a big play guy at Clemson. And I'm thinking, you sure about that, buddy? You know what I mean? Like,
He averaged
he's
like
like,
20 yards. He averaged like 20 yards a catch. Man. Like it was, yeah.
exactly. And that was
Yeah.
that was the thing. He was like, it just struck me as, and I'm like, dude, he averaged 20.3 yards as a catch as a freshman. He averaged 19.8 yards per catch as a junior. His down year was as a sophomore when he averaged 15.9 yards per catch. I mean,
Yeah.
he may not be the traditional big play guy because he's not a 4.4, but as we've said a million times, you don't have to be a 4.4 to be a big play guy. And I think Tobias is going to be another guy that's going to prove that to be the case. We're going to get to two more here, and or three. We got three more questions I want to get to here. Okay, we're going to get two more, and then we have there's only one way we can end with this. Quinn Kibler, the artist formerly known as Q Kibbs, says, Brian and Ryan, what coach not named Freeman would you want to be your main recruiter if you were one of these guys? It's a good question.
That's a good question. I feel like I need time to think about that one too.
For me, it would be Harry Heastan, because for me, I'm a no fluff guy. I want to talk ball. Ryan knows I don't talk about anything except football, really. Harry would be my kind of guy. Hey, coach, what's up? Let's talk about the game. Let's talk about what happened. Let's talk about technique. Let's talk about, I don't need you to tell me I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread. I don't need you to, kiss my booty all the time. I don't need you to, get hot girls on campus when I'm there. I want to talk ball, right? That's where I'm at. And I feel like Coach Easton would be the guy that would be really who I want to see. Because I feel like he'd be the least fluffy, and that just fits my personality type better. So just for me personally, it'd probably be Harry Easton. Now, I wouldn't want to play offensive line. But, you know what I mean? So just for me personally, it would be Tommy Reese, because that means they recruited me as a quarterback. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But
that's
stylistically, be Coach Easton.
That's where my mind went, though, because I played linebacker and a little defensive end. So my immediate thought was maybe Al Washington. I mean, he's had pretty good track record on both areas of that coin. So that would probably be my pick. I mean, Harry, for just the conversation and talking ball, right? Because he just knows, obviously, the game inside and out. But let's go Coach Washington, because that means my Notre Dame dreams of playing linebacker have been up to date here.
So, I mean, you want to play linebacker Notre Dame, then you'd want to talk to Al Golden, correct?
Well, that's true. That's true. But, I'm kind of a hybrid, Brian. I'm
okay. I got you. I got you.
Play some Viper,
I got you. I got you. So yeah, see, because I'm saying you're from Jersey, so that would be Coach Golden's area. I think your dreams might get dashed. I think you might have to deal with Coach Golden.
I did like Coach Golden when he was at Temple, man. I was a big Al Golden fan, so I can dig it. He's
a Jersey guy. I just had to mess with you a little bit. Guinea pig clips. Can you rank our chances of landing the offensive lineman? So we'll just go kind of one by one, Ryan, and we'll just say how we feel. Like, is it we feel good about it, whatever the case may be. Just briefly, number one, Charles Jagasaw. I think that one everyone kind of
feel
knows.
Very good about that one. Yep.
Monroe Freeling.
I feel good about that one. I'm feeling good. Feeling good.
You're feeling good. Ryan's feeling really good about Monroe.
I'm gonna make a T-shirt with "Feeling good" on it.
Feeling good. You better give that kid some of the proceeds and NIL money. Don't be like all these other colleges, right?
I'll message him, man. He'll be good.
There you go. I dig it. Would you say that they lead for the first two? Would you go so? We obviously in Jagasaw. Would you go so far as to say they lead for Monroe Freeling?
Yes, I would.
You feel they're the leader? Okay.
I feel
all right. You feel they're the leader. Samson Okunlola.
I would say the word for Samson is indifference. I don't know how to feel with him, because it's just you don't have enough information, man. He keeps everything close to the vest, and it's just who knows.
Has he visited anywhere so far this spring?
I don't think so. Because
he didn't go anywhere in the winter because he was wrestling, right?
I talked to him last week, and I just hit him up this morning, actually. I mean, he said that he was still finalizing things late last week, so I don't think he's visited anywhere yet.
Yeah,
So,
and I'm pretty sure wrestling kept him from going anywhere in the winter, correct? I
yes,
don't think
yep,
he went
no,
anywhere during the winter. So
hmm
yeah, it's
exactly.
just uh, unknown. I mean, I
Yeah,
don't. That's why we don't feel great about it. That's why we didn't have him projected. Everything about him screams Notre Dame kid, but
for
until
sure.
he feels that, it doesn't really matter. So, and that's why I think him and Stan are going to really connect because Samson just strikes me as the kind of kid that just, dude, let's just what's your plan? What's your plan for me? Right? Like we don't need to don't need you to talk to me about my girlfriend or all that. You just I just well, let's talk ball. I could be wrong on that, but that's why I kind of feel like they're going to commit. They're going to connect really well.
Hmm
Chase Basantis,
Yeah, yeah. I
I don't
I
see
I
that.
haven't
I don't see that
I
one.
haven't felt that good from that one
Mm,
from the beginning. My first time
mm.
speaking to him, I bet you he ends up at Rutgers. I don't know why. That
Something
just something
crazy
about
like that.
something
Yeah,
about it. Yeah, something
yeah.
about it, man.
Wants to be
It's
a
my
big fish in a small pond kind of thing. Yeah. I don't think
yeah.
he's gonna. I don't know where he's gonna end up. I just know it's not gonna be Notre Dame. At least as of right now. I don't see that one. Sullivan Absher.
I feel solid about that one. I don't know if I would say good because I use good for freely. I feel solid. I think they're in a good place, but I wouldn't call them a leader right now.
Hmm. So Jagasol, we think they lead. Freeling at worst, they're in the top two with Clemson. Oak and
Yeah.
Lola, they're in the game, but I don't know if he has a lead group. And if I had to guess, I'd say at best they're third right now behind
Mhm.
Ohio State and Georgia.
Sure.
Basantis, I don't think they're in. They're not getting him. And then Absher, you'd say if you had to rank, they're probably in this top 5, 6, right?
Sure.
Probably they're in the game,
Yep.
but there's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah.
So that is
So
it.
if
And
we were
then
if we were if we were ranking the board, I would just say Jagasaw, Freeling, Absher, Okanlola, Basantis.
mhm. Yep. Is there anyone on there that should have been asked about that you think Notre Dame's going to be in the ball game for?
I mean, I guess Cerveld would be one from Ohio, right? Like I think they're in the ballpark if they want to be in the ballpark with him.
Mhm.
Trying to think of anybody else. Oh, the kid from Arizona, the Pinnacle
Elliot
kid,
Page.
El- Elliot,
Yeah.
Elijah Page. Elijah
Elijah
Page.
Page.
Yep,
Yep. Yep.
yep, yep. I think
Yep.
they're in the ball. They'll be in the ballpark with him too, in my
I think if
opinion.
he visits in the spring, they'll have a really good shot there. Really good shot there. I've never seen a kid that fired up about getting offered by Notre Dame and Harry Hiestand. Like it's been a while. So that one I feel good about. But I need to see that doesn't mean he's going to get to campus and love it, right? That's why I was going to say I got to see a kid get to campus. We're gonna do one more. Just popped up. This Chris B. Kyler Casper no longer seems like an option. Was that him or us? I think Notre Dame. I love our recent tradition of these bigger receivers with speed and long wingspans. Love for those big receivers to feel Notre Dame is home. I love Kyler Casper as a player, and Notre Dame likes him a lot too. Notre Dame not being a player for him is more of him than it is Notre Dame. They would absolutely push for him if they thought he was interested at all, and they're still trying to recruit him, but he's not very interested in Notre Dame. So that's more of a him than it is a Notre Dame thing. And then the last question, I thought this is a great way to end, from Andrew Freer. What is Dante Moore's ceiling? Because we had an interesting debate about this, or not this debate. There's kind of a discussion about this when we did the quarterback breakdown, where some people argue that when you just talk about NFL, that maybe Chris Vizina has a higher ceiling, and I'm sympathetic to that argument, although I don't necessarily agree with it. So
Yeah.
this is an interesting debate, especially for Dante. What is your take on that? And I'll finish things off with mine.
I mean, from a college perspective, I think multi-year starter. I think he's going to win a lot of football games during his college career, and I think that he could be down the road, maybe when he's a junior, a Heisman contender. I mean, I think it's
Mm-hmm.
very possible, right? So I think that's from a college perspective. From an NFL perspective, there's no reason to think that this kid is developed properly with the tools that he has, that he could be a top 10 type of
Mm-hmm.
quarterback. Like that's, I don't think it's
Right.
unreasonable. So
Right.
I think very highly of Dante Moore, to say the least.
Yep. For me, I mean, I think he has everything you look for in a modern quarterback. Leadership, super accurate from a ball placement standpoint, in my opinion. Can make all types of off-platform throws. I mean, there's stuff on film where it's like he's got both feet off the ground as he's about to get hit, throwing a ball on a comeback route. I mean, it's silly. He's got a lot of confidence, but it's not a confidence that can be distracting. It's not a confidence that gets to the point where it alienates him from his teammates, or creates a scenario like a Johnny Manziel where you're like, that dude is gonna implode at some point in time, right? Like, it's a genuine confidence how he plays. Like, there's like the Baker Mayfield confidence where it's like almost like he's convincing himself that he's good, you know. And then there's just the Josh Allen confidence where he doesn't really talk a lot. He just goes out there. And I think I put Pat Mahomes in the Josh Allen category as well, where they're just they play confident. They don't need to tell you how great they are. They're going to just go show it, on Sundays and on Saturdays in college. So I think he's got that. I think he's got a charisma about him where he's just a guy that people follow. I think that's very important for a great quarterback. And I think he's got great tools. I mean, the only thing I'd say about him is his body's not like, he doesn't have like, I think the reason a lot of people think Chris Vizina is going to be better is because he's got the prototype NFL body. And that's true. Dante's 6'1.5", 6'2", 6'5" with the hair, and he's kind, if you look at him, he's not real defined. He's kind of got like just like a body. He's a good athlete. And that's part of the reason I think he's going to be so good is because when you get that kid in the Notre Dame weight room, he's going to, and I think Dante's got a stronger arm than people give him credit for, because Ryan, I know we've both seen game film. They ask him to throw a million short throws. Like, it almost gets to the point where like, dude, let it rip, please. Because when he throws the deep ball, it's beautiful. It's don't let him do it a whole lot. And I think that kind of maybe why people view him as a high. I think the reason he's considered a 5-star right now is because people think he has a super high floor. That's why I think people view him as a 5-star. I think people are missing the boat a little bit on his ceiling. That's what I think. And I saw somebody sent me one analysis of somebody saying like he's not a real athletic guy, and I'm like, just because he doesn't run doesn't mean he's not an athlete. Like, anyone that says that, A, didn't watch a sophomore film, and B, doesn't understand what athleticism is in relation to being a quarterback. So that didn't make a lot of sense to me. But I think his ceiling is of an elite college football player. I don't really look at the NFL. That's Ryan's thing. I don't rank a kid based on like Rivals does, based on what his NFL projection is. That has nothing to do with the kind of college player he's going to be. But for me, I mean, I think he can be an elite college football player. Like Ryan said, eventually a Heisman Trophy kind of guy. Is he a Trevor Lawrence? Is going to be that as a freshman or a sophomore? I mean, no. Bryce Young, let's be honest, if Bryce Young would have had the season he had at any other school than Bama or Georgia or Ohio State, he's not a Heisman Trophy winner. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, he had a great year, but it's like a lot of guys put up those numbers. He put those numbers up at Bama, so, he's going to win the Heisman. I didn't think he was the best quarterback in college football last year. He just was the best quarterback at one of the big schools, right? But next year, Bryce Young's going to be a legit Heisman player to me. And I think we saw that in the championship game. He could not put that team on his shoulders and lead them to victory. When they lost the other receivers, he couldn't do it. Next year, if that happens, I think Bryce Young's going to be in a position where he can do that, in my opinion, Ryan. And so I think that's the difference. And so that's why I say third-year guy. Yes, I think he can be that. And that's people like comps. That's the comp for me. It's Bryce Young. I mean, that's the comp for me. They're very similar body types. Dante's bigger, very similar arms, great ball placement, great feel for the game, great leadership, high character, all that stuff. And, I think Dante Moore can be that kind of player. There's nothing about him that makes me say, gee, I'm not sure there's nothing about his game where I'm like, I don't know if he can do that. I mean, that's the big thing is I don't know what the holes are. And to me, to be an elite quarterback, that's what you need to be. That's why I don't view Nico as an elite quarterback. That's why I think Malachi and Dante are significantly better than Nico, because Nico's got great physical tools, but there's a lot of holes in his game. And to be a 5-star quarterback, I think you need a guy with few or no holes. And that's how I see Dante. I don't know. Do you agree with that last part, Ryan, about just the lack of just looking at it from a college standpoint, just the lack of holes in his game? Or do you see some things that you would pick apart a little bit more than I would?
No, I think that his offense is, and it is frustrating to watch sometimes. I agree with you because, I mean, they're just a heavy RPO-based team, right? They're throwing a lot of screens. They're doing all that type of stuff. But I don't think there's limitations to the arm strength conversation with Dante. I mean, there was a throw that we watched on film where it was literally like a 35, 40-foot throw on the back shoulder where you're just like, there was no, like it's just a high difficulty throw, man, for anybody, not
Right.
just for a high school kid that's only a junior. So I think the upside's immense. I think that people are losing sight of what the upside is because there is a high floor, but I really don't think that there's a ton from a mental processing perspective for a high school junior. It's just extremely advanced. Like, you could tell me that if you just watched his film without knowing what team he's playing for, if he's in high school, whatever it is, kind of in a vacuum, I'd say he's playing in college already. Like, I think that he's that mentally quick twitch of a kid. So I'm a big fan of Dante, man. There's a reason that we keep kind of singing the praise if Notre Dame's able to land him, because I think that there's a full repertoire, and I think that people kind of mistake the fact that he's an advanced player from a mental perspective and from an accuracy perspective to think that he's not a great talent, when I do think that there's a lot of arm strength there. I think he's a good athlete. Like, it's a lot there.
Right. And this is a kid, and that's all those things have been true for a long time. When it's almost a year, they offered him on March 17th last year. He was one of the first offers that went out on, like, when they said the pot of gold thing last year. And I said at the time, like, Arch Manning was the big name, but I said that's the best quarterback on the board right there. And I don't care about, Arch Manning's a good player, and I like Arch and all that kind of stuff, but that's the best quarterback right there on the board. Because you've heard this, Ryan, you're involved in scouting, right? You've heard this a million times from scouts and coaches. I know you've heard this. I can't tell you what it is, but I know it when I see it, right? I can't define what it is for a quarterback. But when a kid has it, I'm like, yeah, he has it. What is it? I don't know, but he has it, right? And I think that's what makes evaluating quarterback sometimes difficult, because sometimes you can get so wrapped up in the physical tools that you can overlook the fact that this guy just doesn't have it, right? Like the Broncos drafting Paxton Lynch. I get why they did it, but he didn't have it. Dante has it, right? And it's not just the physical tools. It's all the stuff that goes into it. He just has – you watch that kid. That kid was born to play quarterback. Just – God put him on this earth to play quarterback, right? And that's just kind of how he is. And I've felt that since they offered him last March. And, now we'll see if all that hard work will pay off. And I assume we'll find out sooner rather than later. So that's going to be it for today's show, everybody. And just remember, before you leave, okay, make sure you hit that like button. All right, hit the like button, hit the notification bell, hit the subscribe button, do all the things we tell you and ask you to do. We appreciate it. It means a lot to us. It helps with the algorithms. It helps make sure that more people get to see our show and help us grow. So hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. And I'm telling y'all, you hear people in the chat talking about it. If you are not signed up for the message board, y'all, you are missing out on some stuff. So definitely sign up for that. It's $4.99 a month. $49.99 for a year. And if you just want to support us and you're not a message board person, you can still sign up. You don't have to post. There's not like a minimum posting number. If you don't post a minimum number of times, we're going to slap you on the wrist. Okay. If you just want to support us, then we appreciate that too. But of course, there's tons of great conversation, lots of intel we're going to start putting out on that, as you've heard people talk about, and just fun conversation. So the conversation doesn't have to end because the show is over, everybody. Okay. You can obviously rewatch the show, but you can also come back. Those are all the ways that you can support us and help us continue to not only grow our channel, but eventually grow our team. Because I made Ryan the director of the recruiting with the goal that someday he's going to have people to direct. So that is obviously the goal of this whole thing. So thanks everybody for being a part of the show today and joining us on the Irish Breakdown podcast.